Hey, 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 here we are. We're streaming. For those of you who might just be listening in for the very first time, maybe you're watching an old video, right? Maybe, in all cases, hello and welcome. Oh man, I'm realizing I'm really dark here. Hold on one second. There, now you can see my beautiful, beautiful face. I live stream Tuesday, 6 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please come on in. Happy New Year. Peanut Butter Beatrice coming on in. Nurtik, Happy New Year to you as well. Yeah, I guess this is it, eh? It's a New Year's stream. I kind of didn't realize that until just right now, you know, that we're doing a New Year's stream. How about that? AJ Wallace over on Twitch. Happy New Year to you, friend. Can't stay. Just wanted to say I love it when people do this. When they pop in and just say I can't stay, but I'll listen in later. That's so kind of you. It's so thoughtful. Thank you guys for being here. I really do appreciate it. What a year! What a year! If I had been smarter, I would have done a year in review. Right? We would have been like remembering 2024. But here's the truth: I would prefer not to. Yeah, I'd really prefer not to remember 2024, right? Like, I feel like I want to look forward into 2025, look forward into, hey, what the heck is all this? What are we doing with our lives? What are we doing with our time? How can we adjust and move ourselves to get away from this ridiculous capitalist shithole that we live in? Hey, have you noticed how ridiculous the capitalist system is? I'm going to jump in to the piece of news that I need to get off my chest, not to be a Debbie Downer, although I feel like you all come in here to listen to me be a Debbie Downer. From India.com. Did Israel explode a small nuclear bomb in Syria? Spike in radiation report says so. In a step that has shocked the entire world. I mean, not America, because we don't listen to this shit. The Israeli Defense Forces carried out an airstrike on the weapons depot at Tartus, Syria, on 16th December 2024. Through the massive strike, Israel reportedly destroyed the Scud missile facility located in Syria. However, reports are speculating that the damage caused by the strike was more serious, and a small nuclear weapon might have been used by Israel. Here are the details you need to know about the Israeli strike on Syria. As a result of the Israeli attack, an earthquake of magnitude 3 also occurred, along with a massive explosion. The earthquake was so huge that it was felt up to Iznik in Turkey, 820 kilometers away. Moreover, Russian media organization Sputnik had then said that Israel had targeted it with a new missile from a warship. However, some reports also claim that the B-61 nuclear bomb developed by America was used here. Reports have also added that the European Union's radioactive environmental monitoring surprisingly found that the amount of radiation increased in Turkey and Cyprus 20 hours after the intense blast, pointing towards a small nuclear attack. Israeli forces continued to operate along the Syria-Israel ceasefire line in the Golan Heights on Sunday after the United Nations Security Council on Friday extended a long-running peacekeeping mission between the two countries. Yeah, I'm just gonna call it like these people are psychos. There's no laws, right? Like there's no laws. We don't need to abide by what any of these people say, right? Like we're in this, like, going into 2025. It's so obvious that these people have lost like all credibility, and the evidence just continues to mount. that no longer is it the case that they have a defensible position. And now it's just about confronting the religious mindset that exists within the capitalist death cult. And like they're dropping nukes. Like they're dropping nukes. Right? And I mean, Long Defiant says Scott Ritter says they didn't. I'm not convinced. Yeah, Scott Ritter's not God. Right? Like okay, so what's with the radiation then, bud? What's the radiation all about? Like, as Israel gets more and more desperate, as it begins to act in more and more outlandish and crazy ways in order to defend itself against the multiple enemies that it continuously makes doing the things that it's doing, it's going to begin doing this kind of stuff. And now we're seeing, you know, that they're willing to engage in this type of warfare. It was always the Russians that were being blamed. Monsieur over on Twitch says, yeah, apparently the neocons were ignoring the Pentagon and saying they were up to some limited nuclear action as well. Yeah, this is insanity. Right? Like, this is absolute insanity. Like, we are, like... I'm trying to think of any kind of historical precedent. Like, what's the historical precedent for this? Like, what is this like in history? I Need Yeti says, John, your account was shadow banned on YouTube. I couldn't find your channel, nor in my subscription. Yeah, I know, Yetis. It's been that way for a long time. Omnicidal. I, for one, cannot wait for Canada to join the glorious U.S. Union. For too long, Canada has benefited from its illegal breakfast food monopoly now, which means Canadian bacon and maple syrup production. I mean, they're talking about it. Right? Like, you've literally got Kevin O'Leary talking about it. You've got Donald Trump talking about it. Like, and here in Canada, we are moving to a, what I would describe as more cowardly government, right? Like, the new polling has it pretty much pegged, and I suspect it'll be like this. The big news, right? The Liberals are toast. If the election was held today, they would have 6 seats in a like they would have less power in the House than the Bloc Québécois. And the Bloc Québécois, for my American friends, is a very niche, very small political party. Not a small political party, but just like, it's niche to Quebec. There isn't a big Bloc Québécois movement outside of Quebec. And the Liberal Party is going to have less power than them. The NDP picking up a few percentage points, and of course, if you're an NDP stan, that means like, oh my goodness, we're taking second place, we're the opposition, we're doing it, we're gonna do the thing. It's like, nah, you guys are just like kind of holding where you've always been, right? You're not growing at all because you don't really offer anybody anything. Meanwhile, the rest of us are swinging towards conservative for some reason. Like, it's just got to be propaganda works. It's just as simple as that, right? Propaganda works. People are just so bought into these failed policies that have failed them their entire lives. There's like no observable evidence that shows them that their lives are better off with these neoliberal policies of total failure. And yet, this is what we want. This is what we're doing. Cool. Joe, good to see you too. Timothy says, whatever happened to the Social Credit Party? I don't even know what that is. Omnicidal writes, they want Trudeau out too. And if the U.S. wanted, they could work with the energy companies and the Yukon and Alberta companies to secede. I think that you would have a pretty big cultural fight on your hands. Like, one of the big... Like, it's not going to be so clean. Like, it's going to be slugfest if they genuinely try to move forward. I don't think it is genuine. Like, I don't. I think that these guys, I think it's mainly posturing. Like, it's all just salesmen in charge now, right? It's just bullies and people pushing each other around. There's nobody that's actually like a rational legislator, right? There's no governors. Like, there's nobody in a position that actually gives a shit. Like, none of these people have an understanding of themselves in history, right? That none of them are actually like, oh, there was a timeline before I got here, and then there'll be the timeline that continues after I go, right? 0% of them. They're literally all just sitting there being like, how much money me good? How much more money me good money? Number go up good. And that's the extent of their thinking. And so because of that, whenever they say anything, it's just detached from any kind of like what would it actually mean? How would you actually proceed in such a way? Like what would you actually have to do in order to actually accomplish these things? And I think that you would experience significant resistance from the Canadian populace. I think even conservatives in Canada would be like, yeah, no, we're not joining with America. What are you talking about? Like, we're not giving up our sovereignty, right? We're not going to like allow Donald Trump to have control of our natural resources. Yeah, no thanks, bro. Like, not interested. And I don't really understand why we would want to saddle ourselves with a declining empire, right? Like, I don't know why we would want to get connected with it. I think that mainly what's going on with a lot of this rhetoric, like Donald Trump has threatened Greenland, Mexico, the Panama Canal, now Canada, right? I think that America understands, and the American bourgeois and the American ruling class understand that they've lost the battle on the world stage, and now they're going into a policy of consolidation, right? They're going into a period of consolidation. What the media, their media, will spin as isolationism, right? That's the word that they'll use, isolationism. But really, it's consolidation after a period of, complete failure. Like, they've had to withdraw from Afghanistan. They're losing the Ukrainian war, right? Like, that's a big one, right? Losing the Ukrainian war, I think, is a big problem for them. That's really been an ego blow for the empire generally. And like, Donald Trump is coming in, and he is, I mean, if he's going to follow through on it, we'll see. He's a notorious liar, so who knows what he's actually going to do. But he's been talking the game about ending the Ukrainian war the entire time, and there's no other way to perceive the end of the Ukrainian war, given what's gone on, except as a loss. And for America, at this point, when you have an ascendant China, when you have a Russia that they attempted to cripple, when you have these sorts of pieces going on the stage, for them to withdraw from Ukraine, like, it's going to be a redrawing of the map, right? Like, you're going to go to Google Maps and the lines are going to be different. Ukraine will look different. And there's no other way to perceive that, right? And so I think this has put the American ruling class in a position of just outright panic, where they're seeking to consolidate. They don't want China, specifically China, to increase its influence into the world. And they want control of places like the Panama Canal. They want control of major ports and major institutions and major locations. They want control of this so that they can literally just shut it down if they want to. Hold on one second, guys. My dog is just sitting here whining at nothing. What's up, buddy? Why don't you come lie down, eh? Come chill out. Come on, buddy. You're just whining at nothing. You're whining at nothing at all. Come on. And I mean, it would be like, as much as we live in a period of time where the ruling class is like psychotically in climate change denialism, the capitalist class has essentially told us we're not going to do anything about it, just deal with it. So what this means is that as the polar ice caps melt, right, places like the Arctic are going to become more contentious, right? There's going to be there's gold in them there hills, right? Like there's going to be this like gold rush that happens in the Arctic, and because we're dealing with primarily capitalists, they don't comprehend or understand the concept of sharing or mutual cooperation or any of that kind of stuff. It's just going to be seize as many resources as you possibly can and be a bully about it. And so from the Canadian perspective, that means that on the one side we have this enormous border where there's this belligerent psychopath, which is America, now talking about absorbing us. And on the other side, we have the Russians, right, who are on the other side of the Arctic. Wick, I've been trying to buy a new camera, and Amazon won't let me. I've tried on several occasions, and I just keep getting rejected. So I'm getting that new camera, my man. It's going to happen, but I've got to like go to a place and like just buy one. I'm just so pissed off. What do you recommend, Wick? Like, what should I actually get? Like, you had some suggestions, and I'm going to like literally just write them down and remember them. Get one off AliExpress. I want something good though. Like, I want something good. Russia's going to take Alaska. Yeah, good luck. So, while this ridiculous polling situation is going on, the liberals actually release this. Right? This is what the liberals in my country, the rulers of Canada, released as like, here's our successes. Here are the successes, everybody. Look at us. Look at how amazing we are, right? Number 1, launch the Canadian Dental Care Plan, delivering services to over 1.2 Canadians so far, they say. Yeah, this is a means-tested program that is designed like it's like Brian Thompson designed it, right? It's designed to find ways to deny it to you. That's the whole point, right? That like, if you are like in a very specific, very niche, very like inline place, then sure, we'll do it for you. But it's like almost voluntary. People don't actually need to go along with it. Like a dentist doesn't actually need to go along with it. I wouldn't be too surprised to find out that all the program actually is at the end of the day is when dentists do pro bono service, right? Because dentists do pro bono service, right? There are dentists out there who are not psychopaths, who are like, yeah, there's poor people and they need dental work and I'll do it pro bono because, you know, I'm not a fucking psycho. That all they're doing is basically saying, oh, anytime a dentist does that, we say check and we say the government did it. I would not be blown away at all to find out that that's essentially what this program boils down to. It's not a universal program. It's a means-tested junk program that the conservatives are going to scrap anyway. So, number 1. Number 2, passed liberal pharmacare to give Canadians free access to prescription contraceptives and diabetes medication. Same story, right? It's not universal. It's a means-tested garbage program. It's loaded with all kinds of bureaucracy that basically says, like, yeah, you got to pay it, then you got to fill out a form, and then we'll reimburse, right? So again, it's like Brian Thompson designed it. Number 3, delivered a holiday GST HST tax break for Canadians. Yeah, this is super great if you're spending like thousands and thousands of dollars over Christmas, right? But if you're the 80% of Canadians that are suffering from inflation, right, the GST holiday is not helping them, right? It's literally just putting them back to like 2020 in terms of how expensive things are. Number 4, expanded the Canadian student loan forgiveness program. Yeah, they expanded it so drastically that I've never seen anybody who's actually been connected with this. Like it, all of these, it's the same thing over and over again, right? It's this tokenism. It's this limp-wristed tokenism that what people want and what people are screaming their heads off is for somebody to literally just be like, yeah, all student loans are forgiven. I don't give a fuck. Like, that's what we want to see at this point. And that's the only thing people are going to accept at this point. That people don't want your little tiny piecemeal reformism. They want sweeping legislative changes. They want people to stand up and be like, yeah, all student loans are forgiven. Giving out student loans is no longer like a thing. We're just making education free, because we can and we should, because we're not a bunch of, well, I mean, we obviously are a bunch of dimwits, but like, if we want to stop being dimwits, maybe actually paying for people to be educated would be a good way to go about things, right? Number 5, strengthened gun control. Always a contentious issue. I as a Marxist, I'm a huge fan of when the government disarms the populace, right? I think that's a super cool thing to do, is to have a populace that's disarmed, right? Number 6, created even more $10 a day childcare spaces across Canada. I don't know, dude. Like, why is this something that we're celebrating? Like, why are we celebrating that, like, oh, sweet, $10 a day child care services so that you can never spend time with your child ever? Like, congratulations. The government's going to help foot the bill so you can go be a good capitalist cog in this machine that's collapsing. Number 7, reached housing accelerator fund agreements with nearly 200 communities across Canada to build over 250,000 new homes. No. Reached housing accelerator fund agreements with nearly 200 communities across Canada to give developers a lot of money so that they won't complete homes, right? Like, that's what's actually going to happen. And number 8, launched the National School Food Program. So we gave schools a couple of pennies and they're going to give lunches to some kids. Cool. Like, this is like classic sort of liberalism, but it's not meeting the moment, right? And everybody knows it. Well, everybody except Justin Trudeau knows it, right? Like, none of these are meeting the moment. And what the moment is a philosophy of thought and an economic idea that is failing and is in collapse. Like, if the building's falling over and you're putting up toothpicks, people are going to look at you like you're a crazy person. And if you turn around and say, well, at least I'm doing something, you're going to look even stupider and more insane. Henry Trudeau. Bro, taxes are basically work money. Where you think money in its deepest core comes from? I mean, money is just an invention by humans. It doesn't actually exist. Like, it's the promise of production, but it's not necessarily a guarantee. And fundamentally, what actually sets the value of a currency and of money generally is military force, the power of the state. Like, it's kind of an abstraction, right? But like, if I can roll into your house and blow up your home, right? No. So Henry Trudeau says, what I'm saying is, you're saying forgive all student loans. Well, that's got to be paid one way or another, so that's taxes. No, it isn't, right? Like, don't replace reality with the rhetoric you've been taught, right? Capitalists use a rhetoric, And their rhetoric exists in order to control the way you think of the world and to control your worldview. And nothing is more controlling on the populace than this concept of taxation and then government spending, right? It's literally not how it works. It's literally not how it works, right? That the idea, how do you think government finance and pay stuff? They create money out of nothing and give it to people. That's how they do it. Literally, that's how they do it. Like, that's literally actually how it works. And yes, it's stupid. Like, the capitalist rhetoric, yet the state obviously creates money. Very obviously, Henry. like very, very obviously they do. Like, that's one of the primary roles of the Bank of Canada. Right? What the capitalists say to you, right? They want you to go along with this idea that the state is a business. That's what they want you to go along with, right? That the state of the business. Yeah, no. So Henry says, LOL, I really need you to stop. You're in a conspiracy space now. Right? You're in a religious space because you're just dismissing out of hand what's being said to you and you're not actually engaging. And I could tell, right? You're just espousing the capitalist rhetoric, and the capitalist rhetoric is government is business. Governments work exactly like businesses work. They take in capital and then there are capital expenditures, right? Because that's how businesses work. Governments are not businesses. Governments are not businesses. Money creation and the maintenance of the currency system is something that is wholly separate from business. And that's why when people go into government saying we're going to run this like a business, you know their policies will fail. Why? Why? Because governments are not businesses. Literally, they are not businesses. So, for example, right, you say the state taxes us in every layer of society to maintain its welfare, army, institutions. That is not why taxation happens, right? That is not the reason why. Henry says, you know that you can't just go around printing money to pay stuff, right? Yes, you can. You literally can. Like, you literally can. That the reason, like, the United States government does that all the time. There is some truth to the idea that if you overprint your currency, then you create inflation, right? Because the value of the item doesn't actually change, but the amount of currency does. And so there's an argument to be said that, like, okay, so you tax down, right? You tax down your currency to maintain a balance there, right? So, and that seems to be the actual reason. Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm explaining to you, right? But you could tax that away from dead sources, right? So, like, someone like Elon Musk, for example, who is essentially just a dead end, just a big giant pool reservoir of nothing. You just tax his wealth away, right? That keeps your inflation in check. And of course, that's all theoretical, right? That's all theoretical. But in terms of how the government actually does work, like literally works, right? Is that they create money out of nothing, right? And then they tax it away from the society in order to maintain some kind of a balance. But of course, taxation, what it's actually used for from the governmental level, right? That they're not actually using it to fund anything, right? Because they don't have to. What they're using it for is for behavioral control. That's primarily what taxation is for. Like when they put a tax on cigarettes or alcohol, for example, right? They're not doing that in order to gain revenue. They don't need to gain revenue. They're doing it in order to disincentivize the usage of that product, because they're too cowardly to actually say, don't use that, right? Or there's too much pushback in the society, right? you can't do an alcohol ban. And there's examples for why that's a bad idea, and so on and so forth. See, Henry, I'm going to stop you right away. Governments are not businesses. Governments are not businesses. I can tell you're just stuck in this religious mindset. Yeah, I'll read it, and then I'm going to say this. Governments are not businesses, right? So here's what Henry wrote. If we as a country can make 3 apples, $3 each, okay, then I print $100 in money and inject in the economy. Will we have more apples? No, we will produce the same apple. Now is each going to cost $20. That sort of assumes that everybody has access to the same amount of money, which they don't, right? That what actually happens is that the government prints $100 in money, they give it to a capitalist, and they keep it, right? So that's the reason why most things don't increase in price. And why it takes time for inflation to come in, right? And that's why you want to be taxing at the highest level. But you're not actually taxing to create revenue streams. You're taxing to control inflation, exactly as we're describing, right? And rather than saying, okay, this rich capitalist who has dead pools of inert money that they're shipping off to like the Panama Canal or wherever they're putting it in order to just sit offshore doing nothing, instead of taxing that away in order to control inflation, we're going to go after the single mom with 3 kids, right, and tax her diapers. That's really what it is. And so fundamentally, right? Fundamentally, how fiat currencies actually work, and how all currencies really work, is the government creates the money, right? And because the government controls a military and they control huge institutions, they have the clout to be able to say this money is valuable, right? It's a promissory note. It's literally just them saying, oh, no. Okay, so Henry says, you see, printing money doesn't make us produce more. Absolutely false. The government can create institutions with its financial abilities that simply wouldn't exist otherwise, right? So like single payer healthcare is like that they can literally just say, oh, we're going to print $100 million and we're just going to put it in an institution. And now that institution exists, we're going to hire a whole bunch of people. We're going to put them in places and they're going to do something, right? They're going to provide a service to the public, like a library, right? That wouldn't otherwise exist. Right? And that's how you increase production. That's how you increase productivity. You direct financial clout. You direct financial capability. And of course you need to have credibility while you're doing it, right? It needs to work, right? It needs to actually like make a type of sense. And you need to be able to describe to people, well, how is this valuable? What do you get from it? But like, nobody, with the exception of like arch conservatives on the hard right that are describing government as a business, think about the library as profitable, right? Like nobody's actually talking about like the library as like, how does this generate profits? That's not the point. The point of a library is not to generate profits. The point of a library is to have a library, right? And how does that happen? The government creates the money necessary. It funds. It buys the properties. It pays the librarians, right? Henry says the state will buy the stuff they need to do that from private businesses. I mean, you're describing nationalization, right? Like that's, or you're describing like, I don't know which one you're describing. Like, are you describing like something that was once privately held and then is purchased or picked up by the state? Or are you describing a partnership, like a public-private partnership? JT writes, Joe writes, accepted, Henry. Where do you think it all comes from, my friend? Hardworking billionaires? Yeah, the hardworking billionaires. Like, fundamentally, all production is the act of the working class, right? And that the government uses its financial capabilities and its ability to print money in order to incentivize production, right? That it there are many workers, I think, that would love to participate as teachers, as librarians, doing all kinds of activity, as artists, right? But they can't because they're fundamentally tied to their need for food and shelter. Right? They need food, they need shelter, they need access to these things, and all of those are privately held and withheld from them. Henry continues, I mean, the state can print currencies and do what they need. They'll have to buy the materials from private business, a school, hospital, etc. If the state do this in large scale, it's bad. I don't understand that comment at all. So what this, like, first of all, the state doesn't need to do any of that, right? Like the state can erect its own institutions, right? That you are beginning with the assumption. Garden State, good to see you. Jeff, good to see you. And earlier there was one fella I meant to say hello to. Marcus, good to see you guys. Guys, thank God you're all here. JT, oh my God. Isaac, good to see you guys. Apocalypse Nowish, good to see you. Says congrats on the channel growing. Good to see you. Eggs D, always a pleasure, my man. Always a pleasure. Oh God, I'm so happy you guys are all here listening to me have a conversation with Henry Trudeau. Good old Henry Trudeau. 1000% good to see you, my man. Good to see you. Oh, God bless each and every one of you for being here. And Monsieur over on Twitch. So you're beginning, Henry, you're beginning with the idea that everything is private, and it isn't, right? Private ownership is an idea that kind of comes out of the World War II period. And the state doesn't actually need to ask permission to do anything. Like that is the power of the state. That it doesn't need to ask permission from the private owners of anything to do anything. Like the capitalists want you to believe that they are more powerful than the state, but they're not. Right? Like the state has control of the military. The state has control of the police. Like the state can do what it likes, and it doesn't need permission from capitalists. And capitalists are aware of this, right? Which is why they fund propaganda systems so extensively, to convince people that private ownership and capital ownership is more powerful than the state. And it isn't. It's not even close. Not even remotely close. Right? And this is what terrifies the capitalists more than anything, is that the idea that the public might actually get enough class consciousness, right? They might raise their class consciousness up enough that they realize, oh, these capitalists are worthless, and in fact, we should incarcerate many of them for their obvious crimes, right? Which we could do. Like, we could. It wouldn't be a problem, in fact. Like, if the proletariat created a party and actually took power, the capitalists would be in for a hurting. And and there would be nothing they could do about it, right? And they know it. So if you're thinking that private ownership is the first step, you are wrong, right? You are wrong. Henry writes, we can, but we don't have all states' institutions. Yeah, because those get dismantled, right? Most of the economy is privately owned. Yep, that's correct, right? Because these were dismantled over time. Meaning the state has to buy from them. I mean, they don't need to buy anything. They can just take them, which they should, and I would. Right? If I owned the state, I would literally walk up to these guys and be like, cool, these are mine now. And they would cry, and I would be like, go away. And that's what would happen. Right? Because the capitalist class are largely psychopaths, right? And they deserve to be stripped of all their assets. And I would, and we should, strip them of all their assets and end this ridiculous charade, right? Like, these people are literally hoarding empty houses and throwing people out into the streets. They should have their houses seized. We shouldn't, and you know how much we should pay for it? Zero. We should not give them a single dime. And when they cry about it, we should tell them to go get a job. Yeah, Like, Henry responds with, if you did that as president, I mean, prime minister, but okay, you would get people against you for violation of private freedom. Right. Propaganda works, right? That private freedom, quote unquote, private freedom, like the freedom to own a slave, right? Like the freedom to discard people into the streets, the freedom to do what Brian Thompson did, which is murder thousands of people, right? The freedom to throw millions of people into debt, right? The freedom to withhold food and shelter from people, the freedom to ensure people. Yeah, Henry writes, I mean, that's just the system we work on. And it should be abolished, Henry. Like, welcome to my channel. Hello, I'm the Canadian commie. Capitalism is a death cult. It should be replaced with a system that works for the people who live in it. And when the capitalists cry about it, we should say, haha, enjoy your prison cell. Like, what we need to do is raise class consciousness. There's been a lot of discussion about this. The raising of class consciousness with the execution of Brian Thompson allegedly by the hands of Luigi Mangione, right? That class consciousness, like, we live in a very dead class conscious state here in North America. And that's been inflicted on us on purpose. People who were actually in positions in order to actually raise class consciousness and raise the idea of class in the first place were essentially purged from the society. Whether that's through state-sanctioned execution or just straight-up economic starvation, right? Like, people were chased out of the media. People were chased out of the academics. This is the Red Scare, period. And that has continued and persists, right? If you espouse ideas that are anti-capitalist and say we should be rid of these capitalists and we should be rid of private ownership and we should be rid of these people, right? Then you get chased out and your voice does not get heard because we live in a dead class conscious state, which is why the society is in the decline that it is in. Because these capitalists, this very small group of parasites, have wedged themselves into every single issue. And we're finding that if we want to get anything done, we have to ask permission from the stupidest, most psychotic people in the society. Henry writes, I think capitalism works. There's your first problem, Henry. It doesn't work, right? Everything that's happening in the society that looks like it's working is happening in spite of capitalism, not because of it, right? Like, most people want everybody around them to have food and shelter, right? Most people want people to be living a decent life. Like, when I walk outside my door, I want everything to be going well, right? I don't want to be stepping over homeless people. I don't want to see crumbling infrastructure. I don't want to be seeing people who are sick and despondent, right? Nobody wants to live in a society like that, but we do. Why? Because a small select group of psychopaths own the vast majority of the assets and don't give a shit about us. And so what you're seeing as working is all happening in spite of capitalism, not because of it. 200 years ago, 85% extreme poverty. Today, 9% poverty. I mean, if you limit everything to your experience, then you can say everything's great, right? Why don't you go ask Africa? Why don't you go ask Latin America? Like, why don't you go ask, like, oh, how did we get all this wealth? Like, capitalism doesn't actually generate wealth, it just steals it. And if you just exclude that from your analysis, then you can just say what you like. But let's respond to the first comment, right? Not because of works. I think capitalism works not because of works. No, literally, if nobody works, then you don't have an economy, right? Labor is the beginning of an economy. If everybody stops working, you don't have an economy. That's why strikes are so effective. But because market is quick to respond. So again, capitalism isn't the market, right? Like the market, like every society has had markets. If you're equating capitalism to markets, then I don't think you actually know what capitalism is, right? And which makes sense, because that's what building class consciousness is all about, right? Building the class consciousness of understanding that it's the working class, it's working people who actually hold the real power in the society, right? That we're dealing with a small group of psychotic parasites who do nothing of value whatsoever, and in fact do negative value to the society, and that we would be better off without them. In socialism, they try to replicate this but fail. I don't think you actually know what you're talking about. Like, all due respect. Like, I don't think you have actually ever looked at any socialist society or structure and have actually looked at it seriously. Like that's just a straight up CIA talking point. In Garden State, New Jersey, capitalism works as is intended for the rich, but for the majority of us, capitalism doesn't work at all. It's quite barbaric. Yeah. Henry writes, but anyway, what I'm saying is socialism tries to replicate the market but fail. Yeah, again, I don't think you know what you're talking about. Just very nakedly, like straight up, like I think that you have created a talking point, or you hear a talking point, right? Like, and you're continuing with that talking point that shows me you don't actually know what you're talking about, right? Just very nakedly, bud. Like, I'm telling you just straight up, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, if you knew Marxism, it doesn't work with markets. What are you talking about? Right? Like for real. Like, what are you talking about? That the struggle with Marxists historically has not been about having a market. It's about whether or not we're going to engage with the international market. That's been the struggle with communist countries and socialist countries, right? That initially, when you have the Russian Revolution, because the Russians were the first one to really try it, there's this idea of, should we be isolationist, right? Socialism in one state, right, versus socialism internationally. And so there's a debate, of course, within that. And Marxists, of course, of all stripes will point at each other and say, that's not Marxism, and this isn't Marxism, and this is revisionism, and all that kind of nonsense. But in truth, it's like a real legitimate debate. Like, can you build a non-international system? Or can you build, like, what does this look like? And of course, now what we're seeing with China is that, yeah, of course you can build an international market-based system. Like, you can do it, but it does require a great amount of vigilance. It requires a great amount of dedication. You have to have like an institutional support system that says, like, yeah, capitalists are going to try to take us over, right? They're going to try really hard. But like, you can't actually prevent markets from happening, because markets exist in all economies, right? Markets existed in slave societies and feudal societies. And of course, capitalist societies. Like, capitalists are the ones that sort of began to create an ideology of markets, right? But markets are not themselves emblematic of what capitalism is. Capitalism is defined by the distinction between the ownership class, the bourgeois, and the working class, the proletariat. This is really what I'm trying to drive towards. Like, this is the beating heart of the whole conversation, right? And I can tell you're not actually listening because you're just typing on your phone or wherever you're typing, right? And so I really would like you to hear this point. This is what I think is important, is that capitalism is not defined by markets. It's defined by the relationship between those who own the means of production and those who do not. That's what defines capitalism. That you're getting lost in the weeds. Right? That raising your consciousness and raising your awareness of the class dynamic that exists in capitalism, which is that there are a small group of people who own all of the assets, who own the means of production, who own the housing, and the vast majority, the mass of the population, who do not, and who have to sell their labor in order to get access to those things. That's what capitalism is. And the whole conversation of markets that you're trying to have is fundamentally irrelevant. Fundamentally irrelevant. Like, it doesn't matter even a little, right? Even a little to the conversation. Like, it's just you getting lost in some la la land over here, right? And has nothing to do with any subject at all. So Henry writes, what Marx wants to do is that a society is going to have an economic plan where people and resources are going to be directly allocated to build everything. So basically it's planned by state. Yeah, I mean, that centralized planning, right? China is showing how successful centralized planning is. They actually finish projects, which we don't, right? The state guesses stuff and numbers through the planning. I mean, it's called a budget. It's called having projections, okay? But it always ends up lacking goods and shelves and stuff. Just nonsense. Just literal, just straight up. I can just say it straight to you, my man. Like, please stop listening to the CIA. Like really, really, please stop listening to the CIA. Every society, even capitalist societies, end up in shortage periods, right? The difference between what happens in a communist or socialist society and a capitalist society is that in a communist or socialist society, if you have shortages, you end up with rationing, you end up with bread, the notorious bread lines, right? But people get access to the resources such as they exist. Whereas in capitalist societies, prices just go up and then people just starve. That's what happens in capitalist societies. And then we're told that that's better for some reason. Henry goes, China is not really working through planning. False. No, Henry, full stop, dude. No. Stop. Please, stop. Stop. Please, God, stop. Oh, man. Yikes. Yeah, I mean, I shouldn't be surprised by this. Like, it's just the propaganda, like the narrative structuring is so strong, and it's so, like, I'm really trying to find a good way to get people to really understand that the story they're being told about a lot of things, but about China in this case especially, is like dead wrong. Like, couldn't be more false, right? Like, you might as well have just stood up and said cats can fly, actually. Yeah, the reason why cats catch so many mice is because they speak the mice language and can fly. Like, that's how off the mark you actually are, right? Like, China is absolutely a centralized planned economy. They have a degree of market liberalization that was brought in by Deng, by essentially the barrel of a gun, and through a lot of political maneuvering, specifically by Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger, and that there is a lot of political expediency that is involved in all of this, but fundamentally, the National People's Congress, controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, is the central planning arm, and that they exert themselves in the society, even in private industry. That you can't really build any private industry without there being somebody from the National People's Congress involved in it, because it's a centrally planned economy. They just have allowed sections and layers of their economy to have a free market, liberalized situation. But the truth is that the proof is in the pudding, right? That they're completing major projects, like major, massive, enormous, large-scale projects that we are not doing. And so if it is your idea, like China is a more liberal version of Canada, right? Like this is like a restatement of like, oh, China's actually using capitalism, actually. So Henry wants to move on. I'm giving preference to Henry because Henry is the kind of a new guy here, and I like to answer questions from the new guys. Nilo, good to see you. Yeah, Marcus is nailing it, right? Nothing is harder to do than to convince somebody they've been deceived. Yeah, like I think that's pretty close to a Mark Twain quote, right? Like, it's easier to fool somebody than to convince somebody they've been fooled. So Henry says, I watched an interview with President Miguel in Cuba, and he says how horrible it is, the sanctions. Yeah, there's people starving. Yeah, the sanctions are horrible in Cuba. It's been that way for decades, right? And the sanctions are brutal. Like, I'm hoping that Cuba is about to go through a revitalization because they're getting connected to the BRICS organization, and the BRICS organization is a economic alliance that started between alliance is too strong a word, but a trade organization that started between Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, hence the name BRICS. And Cuba just got in on that. So I'm hoping that really breathes life into them. Like, to blame Cuba's poverty, like, I've been to Cuba, right? Yes, it's poor, but they're doing very well. Like, I've said it for a decade now. The number one thing that the Cuban people need are tools, right? Like, if you just had people walking around with power drills and Dremels and that kind of stuff, Cuban society would look a lot different. And it would look a lot different really fast. But they're a small island nation, right? Like, they just don't have resources, right? Like, they don't have access. What they do have, right? And like, Cuba should be a very rich place, because they do have tobacco and sugar, right? Which they can turn into cigars and rum. And when I was in Cuba, there were plantations that were in disuse, factories that weren't being used. Why? Because they didn't have a market. They had nowhere to sell the stuff, right? They've been strangled. Like, you can't ship stuff off of Cuba. And so they're being strangled. They can't engage in international trade. And because they're a small island nation, they're not powerful. They don't have infinite resources to pull from. They have to make do. And they do make do. I think they do very well for themselves, all things considered. Right? Like, do they wish they could do even better? Sure. But, like, they're being strangled. And so, like, when I hear people say this thing where it's like, oh, is it their economy? Is their economy? It's like you're saying, I put a belt around that guy's neck and cut off his air supply, but the problem is that he's not breathing correctly. Like, that's what I hear. It's just kind of a madness. Henry says, in Cuba, basically, you rely on the state to deliver, yeah. While the plan doesn't happen, you also can't open your own stuff to aid immediate stuff because the president stops it. So you have to wait for ration. Like, you understand that, like, what's happening in Cuba is, like, economic warfare, right? Like, you understand that it's a siege state, right? That somebody, like you're talking about it as if it's like, I'm just going to open up a shop. I'm just going to open up a shop and I'll have a shop and then I'll do everything I want to do and everything will be... Like, literally what actually happens in reality is, if you want to get anything open, what do you need to have? Private capital. Well, what does private capital represent to a country that's under siege by capital? Right? It is obviously America and American capitalists coming in to try to take the country over, right? Like, that's what they're trying to do and what they've been trying to do for 60 years, right? They're trying to take the country over. And if they can't do it through military force, they'll do it through economic might. And that's exactly what the Cubans do not want. They don't want America coming in and taking control of their country, because they lived through that. You can just read up the Batista years, right? Where there was like an open slave trade, right? Like, when the imperialists and when imperial capital had control of Cuba, it was like total barbarism, right? And so, like, you're comparing Cuba to some utopia you have in your mind, and I say you should compare it to Batista. Henry writes, but that's immediate and catch up with the needs. The more needs, the more market and selling instead of wanting for the state. What are you talking about? What market? They're under sanctions. Like, what market? What are you talking about? Like, for real, what are you talking about? Again, we just keep running in. What are you talking about, the state limits market? They're under an embargo. What are you talking about? Like, I feel like I'm running into a religious ideology here. Like, I'm running into, like, fundamentalist Christianity. That you just have this line in your brain. The state limits markets, the state limits markets, the state limits markets, the state limits markets. And any evidence to the contrary, just eliminate it. Just get it out. Jesus Christ is coming back at any moment. The earth is flat. That's what I'm encountering here. Why? Like, why do you refuse to acknowledge the reality of evidence? Like, why are you debating reality? Like, that's my question. Like, the sanctions that exist in Cuba prevent a growth of a market. 1 + 1 = 2, in fact. And you're, like, bending over backwards to try to blame the Cuban people for what is obviously these embargoes. Like, do I need to quote Obama? Like, you're so out of step with reality on this. It's insane. So the embargo is the reason the state isn't letting people do their own thing. Again, you are under this sort of illusion that Cuba is like this, just full of free people, just sunbathing, and like, oh, there's all these resources that we can absolutely have. They're under a state of warfare and siege, where private enterprise coming in is an attempt to take the country over. Henry goes, I don't know, seems like an internal decision. Embarrassing. Holy shit, dude. This is racism. This is all this is. This is just racism. This is just naked racism, dude. And I've got to call it out. I do. I have to call it out. Like, if I locked you in your house and then said the things to you that you are saying to me, you would think I was insane. Like, you're just outright ignoring, just straight up disconnecting, click, brain goes out, moves over, gone. Right? Just rank ignorance. Just brutal. Like, if it's not racism, it's got to be some kind of bigotry. Like, if you put a fence... So if I put a fence around your house and said you couldn't get out of it, what would you expect to see happen? Like, what would you expect to see happen if I just put a fence around your house and didn't let you leave? What would I expect to see happen? Right? This is like, the reason why I'm reacting so extremely is because you're being so obtuse. Like, this is obtuseness. What's confusing about it? I put a fence around your house. You started a garden. Right? Your clothes are getting all tattered. You're sewing it up. You're doing your best. You're surviving given the situation. Right? Maybe you've got a couple of people there and you're all working together to grow your little garden. And then I look in and I say, oh, look at those poor people. Well, I maintain a fence around your house. What's confusing? Like I don't know why you're being intentionally obtuse. And this is intentional obtuseness. There's no other way to describe it. Henry continues, isn't the USA embargoing Cuba for it to be more like this? Open market, stop being... No, okay, dude, you have to read about Batista. Like, oh my God. No. You're just living in like a naive Pollyannish, like it's just embarrassing. right? Like, America wants to return Cuba to this, right? This is what they want to return Cuba to. They want to return Cuba to the military coup and the dictatorship, right? Upon his seizure of power, Batista inherited a country that was relatively prosperous, right? Relationship with organized crime, encouraged large-scale gambling, gaming license, right? Let's see if I can find very quickly. No, they're just going to go right into this. Disputed death count. People were killed from hundreds to a maximum of 20,000, right? Batista was an imperialist fascist that ran a dictatorship in Cuba, turned the place into a whorehouse and a gambling casino, encouraged the slave trade. That's what America wants to turn Cuba into. Like, you're creating this very Pollyannish, childish view of how America actually operates. America backed Fulgencio Batista and turned Cuba into a fucking a casino, a whorehouse, an opium den, and a slave market. That's what they turned it into. That's how it was. Like, this is the conditions from which Fidel Castro and Che Guevara rose up and overthrew. And since that time, this is what America wants to return Cuba to. It doesn't want Cuba to have, we're going to liberate that market and we'll spread wealth into the populace and it's just those dirty commies. Even a child, like kindergarten level. Henry, my man, holy shit. Holy goddamn shit. America wants to turn Cuba into Las Vegas. Fucking embarrassing. Holy shit. It is stunning to watch people just completely ignore reality on this level. Holy shit. Holy shit. I'm literally showing you a page that explicitly tells you what America did to Cuba when it controls it. And you're saying, no. They want to turn Cuba into a nice, loving place like Las Vegas. Holy shit. Holy fucking shit. Like, when America was in Afghanistan, there were just CIA death squads everywhere. Like, everywhere America goes, it's slavery and fucking, like, genocide like they're doing in Gaza. And you're genuinely typing into chat. You're actually over there, sitting there with keyboard, being like, America just wants Cuba to be like Las Vegas, doesn't it? Why do I think America is so evil? Oh my God, where to even begin with that, Henry? Holy cow, Henry. Holy cow, dude. Okay. Like, where do I begin? Where do I begin? Right? Like, literally the inception of America begins with the genocide of the First Nations people, including, like, the mass destruction of, like, the ecosystem there. Like, the bison. Like, this whole place just got exterminated. Right? Like, there were civilizations here. Like you said you're Maori? Right? Like, so imagine when those British colonizers showed up, instead of letting you survive, they just completely exterminated you. You've got people in your parliament? Yeah, right. Where's the First Nations groups in the Parliament of America? Right? Just full-scale, bloodletting extermination. Even Abraham Lincoln did it. Right? The guy that supposedly frees the slaves is still exterminating the First Nations people. All throughout America. And hey, don't forget about what capitalism did in Latin America. So just the mass scale extermination of the First Nations people. And while they're exterminating the First Nations people, right, they're just kidnapping people, creating slave institutions all across the African continent, and just flooding America with African slaves, right? And this, of course, whole period of colonization, right, and colonization is something that's just straight up agreed upon by the Europeans. France, Germany, Austria, Poland, Spain, Portugal, the UK, they all just sit down and basically carve Africa up. And they just say, yeah, France, you can have this section, Germany, this section, right? UK, you can have this section, right? And they carve it up. So that's how America begins. That's the beginning of America. The next major checkpoint would be the Civil War, right? To deal with the slavery issue. But between those 2 points, you have major labor disputes, right? You have private corporations essentially locking people into wage slave contracts. The very first strikes are coal miners, right, throughout America. The first aerial bombardment that happens on American soil is an American corporation bombing, striking coal workers. The Pinkertons are a real thing that exists. They're straight up just like state-sponsored terrorists going around just shooting people, like the CIA death squads do today. And then you have the Civil War, which is this outrageous bloodletting that happens in America in order to resolve this chattel slavery issue. While that's all going on, right, you have adventurism all throughout the Latin American continent. And now, like, let's just jump ahead to the modern day. Right? Like, America has gone to war with Iraq, Yemen, Oman, Afghanistan, Egypt, Libya. The destruction of Libya, right? The destruction of Libya has got to be, like, if you don't know about this, my man, the destruction of Libya has got to be just absolutely the most outrageous shit that America and NATO did, right? Like if you didn't know anything else, about the history of America, and all you knew was what they did to Libya in 2006, yeah, I'm talking about history. Are you a baby? Like, 2006 is like literally like within living memory. Like, I was alive when that happened. Like, 2006, if you don't know anything else about how America operates in the world and all you knew was Libya, the only conclusion you can rationally come away with is that these guys are Nazis. Yeah, watch what America will do to Syria. Yeah, Syria is absolutely going to just turn into a total shithole. Henry writes, I actually agree with you that America spreads democracy, and for this they invade countries, sanction, and fight wars. Then what are we talking about here, bud? Like, what are we doing? Like, if you actually agree with that, then what are you getting on with? Like, what an odd conversation. What a strange thing to discuss. For me, it's once you understand about the CIA. Like, once you understand what the CIA is, and you understand how the CIA operates, you realize very quickly that America are Nazis. Like, they're like, the Americans are so Nazi that the Nazis actually looked to America for guidance on how to deal with the Holocaust and concluded And this is a real thing. They concluded that the Americans' policies went too far. Henry writes, but that's just because they want to spread democracy, still not justified some stuff they do like Libya and etc. I mean, if you wanted to put it in the best light possible, and some people do, like John Mearsheimer talks this way, right? And John Mearsheimer has become a voice that I listen to a lot because he's so clear. He speaks with a lot of clarity. That the United States view, they hold the view of manifest destiny, right? That they are the indispensable country. It's a supremacist worldview, but and their theory of international politics is that, oh, liberal democracies don't go to war with one another. That was their theory. And so what we're going to do is we're going to turn everything into liberal democracies, right? This, of course, is like a wildly bigoted worldview, right? Because it assumes that you can just walk into somebody else's house and tell them how to live. No, it's just not going to work. JT writes, the fact that literal documents out of the mouth of the US government is ignored is wild. Well, not too wild knowing how neoliberalism manifests. Yeah, this is why I say, like, what we're dealing with, and I think it's important for people to understand this. I think it's real. I think it's true that what we're actually dealing with moving into the future is a combination of either ignorance, like that it's still possible to be caught in like an ignorant bubble and to hold a like Pollyannish worldview, and the system of capital has heavy propaganda systems in order to maintain that, but that's not that difficult to break, right? You just need to literally talk about the history of America, which is why they don't want to teach history. But there's another side of it as well that's way more difficult to break, which is the religious ideology of capital, right? That capitalism has become a religious ideology at this point, as pernicious and overwhelming and as powerful as Christian fundamentalism or Islamic fundamentalism. This capitalist fundamentalism that exists in people's minds. It's like you're talking to a flat earther. It's like just like you're talking to somebody who just refuses to acknowledge just the base reality of what's actually happening in front of them. And that religious worldview, and I don't see many people discussing that. Like I've seen some people mention it. People, what was his name? David Graeber mentioned it. He didn't explicitly call it a religion. He said it was more like an ethic. I'm calling it a religion because that's the dedication that people have to it. This religious ethos needs to be called out and needs to be confronted for what it is, which is a type of fundamentalism that explicitly just says capitalism is good because it is good. And of course, the people who are espousing this worldview the most heavily are the primary beneficiaries of it, right? The people who have made the most amount of money, who don't care how many people they murder, right? Like the people like Brian Thompson. Like the Brian Thompsons of the world are absolutely going to tell you that they're providing a service, right? They're absolutely going to tell you that what they're doing is valuable because the only thing they value in this reality is themselves. And as long as they're getting rich, they don't give a fuck. And it is kind of gotten down to this. The American economy is fundamentally unstable following continued economic policy that has led to unimaginable wealth inequality versus no, it isn't. And that the people who are still defending the system of capital don't actually have anything to say. Right? They don't actually have anything to say. They've got nothing to point to. There's no actual successes. There's nothing they can actually point at. And when they do point at something, you look at it and you say, no, the capitalists fought tooth and nail to make sure that didn't happen and lost. And now we're turning around and trying to tell me that that happened because of capitalism. Like, it's sort of a madness at some point. And it's this madness that insists that we don't need to know what's going on. We don't need to pay any attention to the world around us, right? We just need to watch TV and believe everything it tells us. And over and over, like the most maddening thing that happens during this whole process, the thing that is just like absolutely insane to me, is that you can get on a subject, right? Like Cuba is a good example, right? And he'll start talking about like CIA involvement and intelligence and military and like all of this stuff. And people will give you this like, what do you even tell CIA? What? The tinfoil hat conspiracy? Oh my God, this is just like so overblown. And you can like literally show them documents from the CIA website. And finally you'll get them down this path. And they might maybe finally get to a point where they're like, oh, okay, I can acknowledge that, like, oh, yeah, the Americans are sort of meddling in there and the CIA and all that kind of stuff. And then the conversation will shift over to, like, any other subject. And then you'll be like, yeah, so the CIA. And they'll immediately just go back to, like, the CIA involved in, oh, what are you even talking about? And it's just like you're constantly put in this position where you have to prove the same thing over and over and over again. Like, it's as if you were teaching African history to someone. And you were like, yeah, so Nambia, right? The history of Nambia, and there was a period, and then the colonial period happened. And people went, colonial period? What are you even talking about? The Europeans wouldn't sit down and make a plan with one another and carve up Africa in order to... And you're like, nope, they literally did. Right? They sat down with one another, they carved up Africa on a map, and they spread it out amongst one another, right? And then you got to teach that whole thing with Nambia and like over and over again, till finally they go like, I guess so, even though it's like overwhelmingly the case that happened. And then you move over to like Gabon, and you're like, okay, so history of Gabon, they had the, kingdoms and all this kind of stuff. And then the colonial period happened. And they go, colonial period? What are you even talking about? It's just dumb. Like, there just comes a point where it's intentionally obtuse. And I think that's really where we're at. It's just this, like, reality is interacting with a religious ideology, and people can decide to break with the religion and join reality. And of course, that religion reinforces itself economically in people's life, and so it's tough, right? It can be tough. Or they can just choose to be intentionally obtuse. And I think that's basically what we're looking at. We're just looking at a society that is on purpose being stupid because it cannot confront the consequences of what it means to actually admit, yeah, this thing is failing. Like, it's so obviously failing. Like, they keep projecting power. They keep like the Biden administration did this the entire time. We're like, this is the greatest economy in the history of America. Look at that line go up. Unemployment's down, all this kind of stuff. And then you, like, peel behind the numbers and you're just like, dude, like, homelessness surged a record 18%. That's not the sign of a healthy economy, right? This isn't the sign that things are going well, right? Like, things aren't going nicely for us. I'm gonna go use the washroom quickly. I'm gonna put this video on. Hopefully this doesn't blow your eardrums, but if it does, I'm so sorry. Enjoy.
say that the stigma around homelessness takes away from the priority to solve the issue?
I believe it does. What we really need is we need the communities to be committed to actually solving the problem and not just blaming people who are homeless.
The United States Department of Housing and Urban Development blames the record-breaking increase on the rising...
No sound. No sound. What the heck? Huh. I'll have to look into that. All right. I can't explain that. That's smelly. Oh well. Yeah, U.S. homelessness. Sorry about that, guys. U.S. homelessness surged a record 18% in 2024. Like, these people. Yeah, wait, where did Henry go? Yeah, I can't imagine where Henry went. That's okay, dude. That's always how this goes. Right? Like, that's always how this goes. You get these guys come in, and then they eventually, like. That's sort of the most frustrating thing about doing this. And it's just something that I've come to live with, right? I've just come to kind of accept, which is that once once a person, like, no one is ever going to go like, "Oh, I see. Yeah, okay. Wow." You're not going to watch the come to Jesus moment happen, right? Like, that's kind of what the promise of the debate culture always was, which is why I don't really engage in it, because I don't think that it's serious. Like, you want to be like, no, this is it, and see the other person go like, whoa, oh. But what actually happens is a retreat. And Noam Chomsky, I think, had the clearest version of this, where he was debating somebody one time. Of course, I forget the name of the fellow he was debating. And halfway through the debate time, the guy stood up and said, "I have an appointment I have to get to. I no longer have time for this," and he left. Which is like a pretty clear sign of victory. Like, people took it, especially Noam Chomsky's fans took it as a sign of victory. But that's the best you ever get, right? Like, I shouldn't say that's the best you ever get. I think the best you ever get is somebody going, "Well, you've given me a lot to think about." And I think setting that expectation and setting that bar really helps people out, and helps me out, of saying, no, don't expect to see somebody go like, "Oh wow, I see some, oh good, oh my goodness," right? Like, that's not how it goes. That if you set the bar so that it's like, "Well, I gotta go," and you can go, "Okay," right? And if they say something like, "I'll chew on that," or "That's something I'll think about," right? That's the win. Right? That's the win. The win isn't seeing them have a startling recognition. The win is the promise that maybe they'll think on it, and later on in their life they'll have a change of mind. That's usually how it goes. Like, when I stopped being a homophobe, like, it wasn't, I had tons of conversations with people about it. Right? I had conversations with gay people. I had conversations with allies. I had conversations with all kinds of people. And I didn't have the realization moment or the recognition moment in front of them, right? That happened by myself. It happened by myself, and it was a very personal thing. And so I think that's really how it works. So if Henry finally got what he needed to get, or got tired of the conversation, or felt like it wasn't going anywhere else, well, hopefully later on down the road, that conversation will be one of the many conversations that he has that are going to lead him down the right path, right? It's a series. Like, you like to believe that you're One Punch Man. You like to believe that you're just gonna, but really it's just a series of pokes. That's usually how it goes. JT writes, I tend to think the disinfected masses who are very casual are quite capable of finding the movement. People like Henry are more invested ideologues, likely with some other social reasons. I like to believe that people are coming in here in good faith, more or less. That's where I generally start. That people really have to prove that they're acting in bad faith, right? And I've gotten good at it, right? And there are certain questions that really show you that people are not acting in good faith. Like, if you like it so much, why don't you move there? It's like, oh, okay, bud. Like, I thought that we were actually exchanging ideas here, but you're just kind of an embarrassing fascist. Got it. Okay, moving on from Henry and the Henry moment, as we'll call it. You guys hear that Jimmy Carter died? Huh? James Carter. Jimmy Carter's blood-drenched legacy. 5 months ago, I wrote an article titled Jimmy Carter's Blood-Drenched Legacy about how his former president's record in office contradicted his professed concern for human rights. Despite campaigning on a promise to make respect for human rights a central tenet of the conduct of American foreign policy, Carter's actions consistently prioritized economic and security interests over humanitarian concerns. I cited the examples of Carter's administration providing aid to Zairian dictator Mobutu to crush Southern African liberation movements, financially supporting the Guatemalan military junta, and looking the other way as Israel gave them weapons and training, ignoring calls from human rights activists to withdraw support from the Suharto dictatorship in Indonesia as they carried out genocide in East Timor, refusing to pursue sanctions against South Africa and the United Nations after the South African Defense Forces bombed a refugee camp in Angola, killing 600 refugees, financing and arming Mujahideen rebels to destabilize the government of Afghanistan and draw the Soviet Union into invading the country, and providing aid to the military dictatorship in El Salvador, despite a letter from Archbishop Oscar Romero, who was assassinated by a member of a government death squad weeks later, explicitly calling for Carter not to do so. This list was not meant to be exhaustive, but merely to highlight some of the most prominent contradictions between Carter's ideals and his actions. After subsequent research and reader feedback, I realized there were many examples I had not mentioned. Their significance to the history of American foreign policy and the repercussions they produced is worth exploring in a subsequent analysis. Carter announced in early December that he is cancer-free. This article is written in 2016. Let's just skip down. Let's just skip down. Vietnam. Article 21 of the Paris Agreement in 1973 stipulated that the United States will contribute to healing the wounds of war and to post-war reconstruction, the Democratic Republic of Vietnam and throughout Indochina. When asked in 1977 if the United States had a moral obligation to help rebuild Vietnam, Carter responded that the destruction was mutual. You know, we went to Vietnam without any desire to capture territory or to impose American will on other people. We went there to defend the freedom of the South Vietnamese. And I don't feel that we ought to apologize or to castigate ourselves or to assume the status of culpability. Oh, okay. Dude, that quote alone makes me hate this guy. Like, go fuck yourself, Jimmy Carter. Like, I hope you're burning in hell, dude. Go fuck yourself. What a piece of shit. We literally went to Vietnam and flattened it. Like, we straight up just, like, flattened it. We flattened Laos, Cambodia. We were involved in, like, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and just straight, like, Korea. Like, the whole Indochina Pacific war and we just like flattened it, and this guy's just standing there being like, yeah, I don't think we deserve any responsibility for that, you know? You know, we were just over there flattening them. Some of our people literally said anything that flies against anything that moves. You know, normal things that people say. I don't think that America has any culpability in that. We were just having a good time over there. Yeah, sure, the bombs had our flag and were dropped by our bombers and were flown by our pilots. But you can't assume. Can't assume. Joe writes, I think him a bit of a moral coward, though his malaise speech showed some nerve, I guess, in the context of that era. Yeah, I can't imagine why there's a... Hold on. Let's bring that speech up. Let's do it. Jimmy Carter Malaise speech transcript. Here we go. Dude. I love that they keep all the speeches. How long is this speech? Dude, I'm doing this. I don't care. Here we go. July 15th, 1979. Good evening. This is a special night for me. Exactly 3 years ago, on July 15th, 1976, I accepted the nomination of my party to run for the President of the United States. I promised you a president who is not isolated from the people, who feels your pain. God, I hate that phrase so much. The Democratic Party with this shit, who feels your pain, get completely fucked, you losers. And who shares your dreams, and who draws his strength and his wisdom from you. During the past 3 years, I've spoken to you on many occasions about national concerns. The energy crisis, reorganizing the government for sale, right? To sell the government, right? That's the whole point. Our nation's economy and how we're going to sell it to private interest. And issues of war, and especially peace. Yeah, because Americans, big believer in peace. But over those years, the subjects of the speeches, the talks, and the press conferences have become increasingly narrow, focused more and more on what the isolated world of Washington thinks is important. Gradually, you've heard more and more about what the government thinks, or what the government should be doing, and less about our nation's hopes, our dreams, and our vision of the future. Like, literally, he's just setting this up. So you bet. You sure are shooting, right? Lately, you've been hearing about how the government should do something instead of talking about just thinking of doing stuff for yourself, right? It's like when Kennedy was like, "Don't ask what your government can do for you. Ask what you can do for your government." Like, don't ask what your rulers can get done for you. Ask what you can do for them. Like, shut up, you fucking parasites. Just total losers. 10 days ago, I had planned to speak to you again about a very important subject. Energy. For the 5th time, I would have described the urgency of the problem and laid out a series of legislative recommendations to the Congress. But, as I was preparing to speak, I began to ask myself the same question that I now know has been troubling many of you. Why have we not been able to get together as a nation to resolve our serious energy problem? Capitalists don't solve problems. They vulture on and parasite on and extract as much wealth as they can and continue the problem. If they will literally be the cause of and the solution to the problem as long as that solution perpetuates the problem, right? Like, they'll literally create cancers and then create cancer drugs to treat the cancer they're creating, right? They'll literally do that. It's clear that the true problems of our nation are much deeper than gasoline lines or energy shortages, deeper even than inflation or recession. And I realize more than ever that as president, I need your help. So I decided to reach out and listen to the voices of America. I invited to Camp David people from almost every segment of our society. Business and labor. Teachers and preachers. Governors, mayors, and private citizens. And then I left Camp David to listen to other Americans, men and women like you. It has been an extraordinary 10 days, and I want to share with you what I've heard. I'm looking forward to this, dude. This is going to be good. It's going to be real good. First of all, I got a lot of personal advice. Let me quote a few of the typical comments that I wrote down. This is from a Southern governor. Mr. President, you're not leading this nation, you're just managing the government. You don't see the people enough anymore. Some of your cabinet members don't seem loyal. There is not enough discipline among your disciples. Don't talk to us about politics or the mechanics of government, but about an understanding of our common good. Mr. President, we're in trouble. Talk to us about blood and sweat and tears. If you lead, Mr. President, we will follow. Many people talked about themselves and about the condition of our nation. This from a young woman in Pennsylvania. I feel so far from the government. I feel like ordinary people are excluded from political power. Dude, they're so close, eh? Like, they're so close. Right? They're just, like, right there. Like, hanging on. They're just literally like, I just feel so, I don't know, like, alienated from my labor, as if there's, like, some other, I don't know, class of person that's benefiting that I don't actually know and meet. And this from a young Chicano. Some of us have suffered from recession all our lives. Some people have wasted energy, but others haven't had anything to waste. And this from a religious leader. No material shortage can touch the important things like God's love for us or our love for one another. And I like this one particularly from a black woman who happens to be the mayor of a small Mississippi town. The big shots are not the only ones who are important. Remember, you can't sell anything on Wall Street unless someone digs it up somewhere else first. They're like right there. They're just right there. They're like grazing up on it. They're like literally like, oh my God. Ugh. Man, the Red Scare really worked, eh? Like, it really, really worked. You just have like a whole bunch of people that are just like, yeah, wait a minute. Labor is the more important of the, but, well, I gotta get to work. Oh, I'm going to work. Right? Imagine if there was like anybody in the 70s and 80s who had any prominence being like, yeah, there's two classes. You've got the capitalist class who own everything and you all work for them. And the capitalist class is not interested in solving your problems because they profit from not solving your problems. This kind of summarized a lot of other statements. Mr. President, we are confronted with a moral and spiritual crisis. I mean, yeah, I guess it is a moral and spiritual crisis, like the things a death cult, right? Several of our discussions were on energy, and I have a notebook full of comments and advice. I'll just read a few. Boy, I'm looking forward to this. This is great. Dude, back in like 1979, people were like right there. They were just like, they just needed somebody to be like, and then they voted in Reagan. We can't go on consuming 40% more energy than we produce. When we import oil, we are also importing inflation plus unemployment. We've got to use what we have. The Middle East has only 5% of the world's energy, but the United States has 24%. I love it that they use the word energy when it's literally like oil. Like, this is what they're talking about. It's oil is what they're talking about. Guys. I think we are going to be alive to see like the decline of oil in a significant way. Like, it's going to be so fucking crazy to watch. Like, we're going to run out of the stuff, right? Like, we're going to run out of it. And there's going to be like this declining precipitous tip where like the capitalists are going to jack the price of oil so much because the only people that'll be able to buy the oil is going to be like the United States military, basically. Right? And like wealthy people will pivot and they'll have like their private jets that are like Tesla jets or whatever. And the rest of us will basically just be told to get stuffed. It's going to be so crazy to watch. And this was one of the most vivid statements. Our neck is stretched over the fence and OPEC has a knife. There will be other cartels and other shortages. American wisdom and courage right now can set a path to follow in the future. This was a good one. Be bold, Mr. President. We may make mistakes, but we are ready to experiment. Yeah, you should have experimented by getting rid of your capitalists. You'd be so much better off, dude. Can you imagine if in 1979 Carter was like, and that's why we're imposing 100% tax on wealth over $1 million. And all businesses will be owned by the people who work in them. Like equal share for equal work. And this one from the labor leader got to the heart of it. Oh, here's a good one. Labor leader, right? At this point, it's literally like just the whole system's been co-opted, right? The real issue is freedom. We must deal with the energy problem on a war footing. Yeah, what if we take over the unions and install far-right libertarians as union representatives, right? That'll be good for labor, right? And the last that I'll read, when we enter the moral equivalent of war, Mr. President, don't issue us BB guns. These 10 days, so for 10 days the guy goes around and talks to some people. Real man of the people. These 10 days confirm my belief in the decency and the strength and the wisdom of the American people. But it also bore out some of my long-standing concerns about our nation's underlying problems. Let's see what he thinks the underlying problems are. I know, of course, being president, that government actions and legislation can be very important. That's why I've worked hard to put my campaign promises into law. And I have to admit, with just mixed success. But after listening to the American people, I've been reminded again that all the legislation in the world can't fix what's wrong with America. So, I want to speak to you first tonight about a subject even more serious than energy or inflation. I want to talk to you right now about a fundamental threat to American democracy. You're a fundamental threat to American democracy. I do not mean our political and civil liberties. They will endure. And I do not refer to the outward strength of America, a nation that is at peace tonight everywhere in the world. Jimmy. I love this. A nation that is at peace tonight everywhere in the world with unmatched economic and military might. This has big, like, we'll spread peace through force vibes. We'll show them our peaceful ways through force. The confidence that we have always had as a people is not simply some romantic dream or a proverb. Oh, hold on. I skipped something. Hold on. Right. The threat is nearly invisible in ordinary ways. Like, now begins the mental gymnastics, right? Like, we're going to bend over. But here's the real heart, guys. It's not that you have a ruling class of parasites that are steadily eroding and destroying your society for money. It's this. The threat is nearly invisible in ordinary ways. So don't pay attention to your boss. Pay attention to this nearly invisible threat. It is a crisis of confidence. It is a crisis that strikes at the very heart and soul and spirit of our national will. We can see this crisis in the growing doubt about the meaning of our own lives and the loss of a unity of purpose for our nation. So again, don't pay attention to reality. You're just having a crisis of confidence. This is what is called classically gaslighting. This is gaslighting. Yeah, the problem isn't the people who are destroying the economy actively for money. The problem is you and your lack of confidence. The erosion of our confidence in the future is threatening to destroy the social and political fabric of America. We just need to be confident. We just need to bluster forward with great confidence. Right? That must be why they elected Reagan. Carter was like, we need more confidence. And people were like, Reagan's got a lot of confidence. The confidence that we have always had as a people is not simply some romantic dream or a proverb in a dusty book that we read just on the 4th of July. It is the idea which founded our nation and has guided our development as a people. It sounds like a religion, doesn't it? Confidence in the future has, replace the word confidence with faith here, right? Faith in the future has supported everything else. Public institutions and private enterprise, our own families, and the very Constitution of the United States. Faith has defined our course and has served as a link between generations. We've always believed in something called progress. We've always had he says it straight up. We've always had a faith. He actually said faith there, right? I've been saying faith. He said it. Faith. That the days of our children would be better than our own. Yeah, remember when people believed that? Remember when people actually thought that that was going to be a real thing, right? I know what we'll do. We'll drown our children in debt. We'll destroy the economy 3 times. What's some other bullshit that we did? Whatever. And then we'll triple the cost of housing. They'll be better off for it. Our people are losing that faith, not only in government itself, but the ability as citizens to serve as the ultimate rulers and shaper of our democracy. As a people, we know our past and we are proud of it. Our progress has been part of the living history of America, even the world. We've always believed that we were part of a great movement of humanity itself called democracy, involved in the search for freedom, and that belief has always strengthened us in our purpose. But just as we are losing our confidence in the future, we are also beginning to close the door on our past. Dude, so he literally started with confidence, and now that last paragraph is straight up Bible thumping, man. Just straight up, just Jesus has to say to you, in a nation that was proud of hard work, strong families, close-knit communities, and our faith in God, too many of us now tend to worship self-indulgence and consumption. Human identity is no longer defined by what one does, but by what one owns. But we've discovered that owning things and consuming things does not satisfy our longing for meaning. We've learned that piling up material goods cannot fill the emptiness of lives which have no confidence or purpose. He's just one hair's breadth step away. One hair's breadth step away from just being which is why you need to turn to Jesus, and please, if you could just reach into your wallet and send $1 to the address you see below. He's just right there. The symptoms of this crisis of the American spirit are all around us. Now, it doesn't come off as hokey. It comes across as a sermon. He's giving a religious sermon, right? And it makes sense. Americans are highly religious people in the first place. Christian fundamentalism is a very powerful thing. But, Jimmy Carter's a capitalist. This is a capitalist sermon. Right? What is he talking about here? He's talking about a crisis of faith. A crisis of confidence. Well, a crisis of confidence in what? in the religious idea of capitalism. It's like MLK without the fuck those moderates. Dude, actually, that's probably too far. The symptoms of this crisis of the American spirit are all around us, in the works of the devil. For the first time in the history of our country, a majority of our people believe that the next 5 years will be worse than the past 5 years. 2/3 of our people do not even vote. The productivity of American workers is actually dropping, and the willingness of Americans to save for the future has fallen below that of all other people in the Western world, thanks to the works of the Lord of Darkness, Lucifer. As you know, there's a growing disrespect for government and for churches and schools and the news media. Yeah, I can't imagine why. And other institutions. This is not a message of happiness or reassurance, but it is the truth. But it is the truth. And it is a warning. I love this, dude. This is great. I hope you guys are having fun out there. I'm having a great time with this one. This is good. What a great way to celebrate the death of Jimmy Carter, by reading probably his most famous speech and just taking the piss out of it. These changes did not happen overnight. They've come upon us gradually over the last generation. Years that were filled with shocks and tragedies. Here we go. We were sure that ours was a nation of the ballot, not the bullet, until the murders of John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. were taught that our armies were always invincible, and that our causes were always just, only to suffer the agony of Vietnam. We respected the presidency as a place of honor until the shock of Watergate. We remember when the phrase "sound as a dollar" was an expression of absolute dependability, until 10 years of inflation. We have someone in chat here. Matus? Stick around, bud. I'll talk to you. I'm just taking the piss out of Jimmy Carter for a minute. Stick around, though. We'll talk. These wounds are still very deep. They have never been healed. Looking for a way out of this crisis, our people have turned to the federal government and found it isolated from the mainstream of our nation's life. Washington, D.C. has become an island. The gap between our citizens and our government has never been so wide. The people are looking for honest answers, not easy answers. Clear leadership, not false claims and evasiveness and politics as usual. What you see too often in Washington and elsewhere around the country is a system of government that seems incapable of action. You see a Congress twisted and pulled in every direction by hundreds of well-financed and powerful special interests. You see every extreme position defended to the last vote, almost to the last breath, by one unyielding group or another. You often see a balance and a fair approach that demands sacrifice. A little sacrifice from everyone, abandoned like an orphan without support and without friends. That's actually pretty like evocative right there. Dude. Often you see paralysis and stagnation and drift. You don't like it, and neither do I. What can we do? Overthrow the capitalist class. Overthrow your capitalist masters and seize the means of production for yourself. First of all, we must face the truth, and then we can change our course. We simply must have faith in each other, faith in our ability to govern ourselves, and faith in the future of this nation. I love it, dude. He just straight out says, we simply must have faith in each other, faith in our ability to govern ourselves. Just get the fuck away from the government. Stop expecting the government to do anything for you. Just go govern yourselves. For all the anarchists in the chat, you're like, oh, Jimmy Carter, anarchist. Oh. One of the visitors to Camp David last week put it this way. Bye, Matthews. One of the visitors to Camp David last week put it this way. We've got to stop crying and start sweating. Stop talking and start walking. Stop cursing and start praying. The strength we need will not come from the White House, but from every house in America. Straight up, just an American being like, yeah, we've been abandoned. We're all going to have to just do it ourselves because, like, sure, we could mobilize the entire nation to go kill Vietnamese, but we can't mobilize the nation to, like, feed people. What are you talking about? We know the strength of America. We are strong. Hey, Henry came back. Just give me a minute, Henry. We know the strength of America. We are strong. We can regain our unity. We can regain our confidence. We are the heirs of generations who survived threats much more powerful and awesome than those that challenge us now. Our fathers and mothers were strong men and women who shaped a new society during the Great Depression, who fought world wars, and who carved out a new charter of peace for the world. We ourselves are... That's actually like a pretty baller phrase right there. Like that whole paragraph is actually pretty kick-ass. We ourselves are the same Americans who just 10 years ago put a man on the moon. We are the generation that dedicated our society to the pursuit of human rights and equality. We are the generation that will win the war on the energy problem and in that process rebuild the unity and confidence in America. Yeah, and then you know what they did? They just fracked America. They literally like poisoned the whole place. We are at a turning point in our history. They're always at a goddamn turning point. There are two paths to choose. One is a path I've warned about tonight. The path that leads to fragmentation and self-interest. Down that road lies a mistaken idea of freedom. The right to grasp for ourselves some advantage over others. That path would be one of constant conflict between narrow interests ending in chaos and immobility. It is certain. It is a certain road to failure. Yeah, that's the capitalist road, right? That's self-interest, like the mistaken idea of freedom, right? That the right to grasp for ourselves some advantage over others. Right? That's capitalism, baby. That's what it does. All the traditions of our past, all the lessons of our heritage, all the promises of our future point to another path. The path of common purpose and the restoration of American values. That path leads to true freedom for our nation and ourselves. We could take the first steps down that path as we begin to solve our energy problem by blowing up our country and poisoning everything. Energy will be the immediate test of our ability to unite this nation, and it can also be the standard around which we rally. On the battlefield of energy, we can win for our nation a new confidence, and we can seize control again of our common destiny. Manifest destiny. Manifest destiny. In little more than 2 decades, we've gone from a position of energy independence to one in which almost half the oil we use comes from foreign countries, at prices that are going through the roof. Our excessive dependence on OPEC has already been a tremendous toll on our economy and our people. This is the direct cause of the long lines which have made millions of you spend aggravating hours waiting for gasoline. It's a cause of the increased inflation and unemployment that we now face. This intolerable dependence on foreign oil threatens our economic independence and the very security of our nation. It's always foreigners, eh? Like, here's little Jimmy Carter, right? Like, he's Lefty Carter, right? Foreign oil. It's always foreigners, man. Every single time. How can we make this about the foreigners? The energy crisis is real. It's worldwide. It is a clear and present danger for our nation. These are the facts, and we simply must face them. Yeah, we wouldn't want to, try to think of a way to have energy independence from oil, right? Like, it's always energy independence for the nation, but it's never like, hey, how do we have energy without oil? Isn't there some way that we could do this without, burning the bones of our ancestors? Isn't there some way of doing it? No, it's always oil. The answer is always oil. Oh, okay. What I have to say to you now about energy is simple and vitally important. Point 1. I am tonight setting a clear goal for the energy policy of the United States. Beginning this moment, this nation will never use more foreign oil than we did in 1977. Never. From now on, every new addition to our demand for energy will be met from our own production, our own conservation. The generation-long growth in our dependence on foreign oil will be stopped dead in its tracks right now and then reversed as we move through the 80s. For I am tonight setting the further goal of cutting our dependence on foreign oil by 1/2 by the end of the next decade, a saving of over 4.5 million barrels of imported oil per day. And they did it. You know, that is true, actually. They straight up did do it. All right. He's going through these points. I got to tell you, I'm getting a little bored of this. I'm going a little bored of this. Hold on. He's like talking about the synthetic rubber corporation. I'm good. All right. Jimmy Carter. He was an idiot like the rest of them. That's fine. American presidents. They're war criminals. All right. Henry. Do you believe every international organization is owned by America? I assume you're talking about like the World Health Organization or like the UN, like any specific international institution. Controlled is too heavy a word, but dominated would be the word that I would use, right? Like controlled implies that it's just like America, like every single person literally just kowtows to America out of like some sense of like actual one-to-one, like, well, the Americans said. But the truth is that it's just America is big and powerful and can dominate other people, and they do. And so like international organizations are absolutely dominated by America because America can cause a lot of problems. And I mean, take a look at Donald Trump, right? Donald Trump's a real case in point. Like he's just a gigantic, like all of this tariff talk is just bullying, right? Just huge bullying. And then Henry says China is also big and dominating, right? So that is a concern. It is absolutely a concern that China is big, and it has gotten powerful very swiftly. So there are lots of people. Again, I refer to John Mearsheimer because I think John Mearsheimer asked the question the most presciently, which is, can China rise peacefully? That's the question that he asks, and he comes to the conclusion that China cannot rise peacefully. But it isn't because China is going to go on a rampage the way that America does. It's because he thinks that America is going to start a war with it, and that America views China's rise to power as a threat. America does not want a peer competitor. It does not want a peer competitor. It wants somebody, it wants docile countries who are going to essentially be its vassal. China is not going to allow America to treat it that way. It's not going to permit, it's certainly not going to go back to the 100 years of humiliation, pre-Mao, right? And so America finds itself in a really tough position when it comes to China, because so much of the American economy is tied up in China, and that China has done a really good job of interweaving its economy into the American economy, so that if America does go to war, the very first thing with China, the very first thing that would happen is that the American economy would collapse. Some people jump to the conclusion that because China is big and is it is obviously a dominant force in the region, that it is going to inherently act the same way that America acts. But I don't see that. I don't see the evidence for that. I don't think that, and I think the biggest reason for why that's the case is because the National People's Congress and the Chinese Communist Party own the banks. That Lenin defined imperialism as finance monopolies, banks, inevitably funding military adventurism in order to create new markets abroad. And that's what imperialism is. But there can't be finance monopolies in a system where the banks are nationalized, right? So So I think the Chinese have kind of nipped it in the bud. Now, that said, yeah, a war among the two is world over. That's for sure the truth. Like, that's why even the Americans, when they talk, like, what's so concerning about how the Americans discuss going to war with China? And they do discuss it. They talk about going to war with China. What's so concerning about the way they discuss going to war with China is that they think they can keep control of it. And that's not how war escalation actually works. That wars spiral out of control and take on kind of an energy of their own. Chris Hedges talks about this a lot. He writes about it very presciently in his book, War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning, where war takes on its own life and people get swept up in the energy of war and in the conflict. And regular, normal, average, everyday people who could be nice and lovely suddenly become just mass murdering psychos who are absolutely capable of doing any barbaric act that a human is capable of doing, because that's the spirit of the war and that's what's got them swept up. And so because of that, a conflict like right now, what's happening in Ukraine is incredibly dangerous. And for this exact reason, that they're toying with an escalation ladder that they think they can control, but they can't. So Henry writes, America is slowly transforming the Middle East into democratic allies. Saudi Arabia, Syria now. Iraq is kind of supportive. Egypt also. I think that is a poor analysis, Henry. Like, let's just like be real clear. Saudi Arabia is completely self-interested. Saudi Arabia is actually angling to join BRICS. I like to describe Saudi Arabia as Machiavellian evil geniuses. The Saudi princes are very politically astute. They understand what their people want. They know how to deliver it to their people, and they aren't suckers or saps. Oh yeah, many pro-Palestinians are mad at Saudi Arabia's position towards the war for sure. No, like I said, Saudi Arabia are evil Machiavellian geniuses. Like the Saudi princes are always on the right side of power. That's really important to understand about Saudi Arabia. Like, whenever there's a big post-war picture, right, and there's like a representative from each nation shaking each other's hands, being like, we did it, we won the conflict, and we get to set the tenor for the next period of time. Well, not the person in the dead middle, and maybe not even the person to the left of that guy, but the person beside that guy is a Saudi prince. The Saudis are always on the right side of power because they know how to do it. They're very shrewd, and they're very Machiavellian. Like they don't screw around. They understand what to do. What has not been widely reported, and so one of the big reasons why I think you're holding the position that you hold is that it has not been widely reported that Saudi Arabia and Iran have created a trade agreement with each other. That is and that's fairly recent. That's within the last 6 months. That was negotiated by China. That's a major blow to American influence in the region. That historically speaking, like within the last 40, 50 years, Saudi Arabia has been an ally to the United States. And Saudi Arabia has been working with America. That is changing. And it's because Saudi Arabia sees two major shifts are happening in Saudi Arabia, or happening to Saudi Arabia as far as they're concerned. Shift number one is peak oil, right? Saudi Arabia has historically been an oil generating nation. It's how they've generated their wealth. Well, they know that that's going to come into a decline. They understand that. And so they are moving towards non-oil based energy independence and shifting themselves into better trade negotiation and better trade connections. Saudi Arabia understands this. They're using what they've got, a lot of sunlight in deserts, to put up a ton of solar panels and create a lot of solar projects and a lot of big super projects, because they know that the next generation, what their struggle is going to be on the world stage, what their big struggle on the world stage is going to be remaining relevant, right, as they decline as an oil producing power. And then Henry continues, but you should be aware that the Saudis are much more to the American than Chinese. I don't think I understand your comment. So I don't think I'm going to comment on that because I don't think I understand it. Are much more what to the Americans? So that's the first thing, is the decline of oil, right? The Saudis see it coming, and they're doing what they can to kind of mitigate it and move away from it. And then the second big thing that they see happening is the decline of America as a power. That China is very obviously on the ascension, and America is very obviously on the decline. And so what the Saudi princes are doing is they are pivoting their support away from America towards China. And they're positioning themselves to turn China into a major trading partner. I'm going to get into something that's a bit speculative, okay? But I think it's true. So I'll start with the facts that we absolutely know, right? So from China, there's a project called the Belt and Road Initiative, an enormous rail system that comes out of China and goes into Russia and Europe, and then also goes into Iran. There's a rail that's gone up through Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and ends in Tehran, right? So China is basically spreading high-speed rail out throughout the continent, trying to connect itself up by land routes to most of the world's population. This Belt and Road Initiative, this enormous high-speed rail program, they definitely are trying to get pushed into Turkey and then up through Bulgaria to have a secondary route into Europe to make it difficult for European, like the EU, NATO, and America, to cut them off from Europe. They have one problem, and they have a major problem, right? How do they get that rail into Africa? How do they get the rail into Africa? Here's Israel, right? If they wanted to connect it to Baghdad and then go down to Medina, right, or Riyadh, and then put it through into Cairo, they can't, right? There's no way that Israel is going to allow a rail through their territory. They're just not going to allow that. And that goes right down to the Gulf of Aqaba. Right? Tough. So, 1. 2, Saudi Arabia in this region right here is building a project that they call NEOM, which means future city. It's going to be gigantic skyscraper-sized walls, 2 of them, that run in a straight line. It's going to cost like $1 trillion to build this thing. It's very difficult for me to not conclude, and here we get into the speculation, because we're just putting the pieces together, that what Saudi Arabia is doing is they're building a rail system to connect the Belt and Road Initiative to go under the Gulf of Aqaba. I assume it's going to be under. Could be over, but I assume it'll be under. In either case, to cross the Gulf of Aqaba and then get to the Suez Canal with that rail. And the second they get to the Suez Canal, and then connected to Cairo, not only are they connected by rail to the African continent, they're also connected to the largest trading port in the world. Right? Yeah. And XD is correct, which is why they're desperate to get that greater Israel going, because they want to seize as much territory as they can. Like, if they can seize the Suez Canal, if they can seize all this territory, right? Like, right now they're doing this Syria thing because the north is getting destabilized. And so they're trying to stabilize by seizing as much territory as they can up here. But ultimately, they want to block this. They want to make sure the Chinese cannot get the Belt and Road Initiative into Africa. That's absolutely crucial. And so this is a project that Saudi Arabia is actually involved with China. And why that's so important for Saudi Arabia is that this would make the only connection by land between China and Africa. Saudi Arabia is going to make $1 trillion doing this. They can literally turn to China and just be like, so we get like a percentage of anything that comes through there, right? And China's going to say, yeah, obviously. Saudi Arabia's economic future forever is completely secured. So this is what the plan is, near as I can tell. And this is why Saudi Arabia and Iran have turned to one another and basically said, can we put our differences aside and actually like create a trade deal with one another? Because both Iran and Saudi Arabia understand that their stability and security rests in working together with China. That's what's going on in the Middle East right now, is that Iran and Saudi Arabia are buddying up. This, of course, is the reason why what's going on in Israel and the spreading, as XD says, is happening as it's happening, because these two forces are going to dominate this area. If it becomes close enough, right, you could see a reforging of something similar to the Ottoman Empire. But that's big politics. That's big politics. That's gonna be like big long term. Scrail, good to see you, Scrail. Yeah, imagine if they spent that kind of money fixing climate change instead. Yeah, absolutely. And so you mentioned something up here about, Syria and Iraq are kind of similar, which is that they aren't so much supportive as they are quelled. That Iraq can't really produce anything or involve itself in any of these politics because it's so fractured. Right? It's essentially two countries now, right? It's just broken and it's just warlords, and like the territory is very like there's nothing official. No lines have been drawn or anything. But like there's entire sections of the country that the ruling class don't really control. So Iraq is not really supportive so much as it is like not able to not be involved, if you understand. Yeah, balkanized is a good way of putting it. Syria is the same story, right? So this whole territory here is just kind of fucked. It's just kind of fucked. They're not able to participate, right? They're not able to really be part of the conversation in a serious way. Which, from Israel's perspective, which is the American military base in the region, is fine. They're fine with that. So as long as Iraq and Syria are not able to participate, that's fine. The real danger is what's going on with Saudi Arabia and Iran. Saudi Arabia was a creation of the British, yeah. Well, the actual name of this territory was Arabia, right? It's just Arabia. The Saudis are the princes, right? So it's Saudi Arabia. And should another family take over Arabia, they would likely name it, whatever their name is, Arabia. And of course, the largest military threat in the region is for sure Yemen. Right? Yemen fired a missile at Israel not that long ago. Like, I think yesterday, in fact, if I'm not mistaken. Right? The Houthis are not fucking around. Like, that's what's crazy about the Houthis. And like, what's crazy about this whole thing? Like, I'm actually more or less of the opinion that it's the Houthis that really showed the world how ineffective the American military has become. That the American military can't really fight a real conflict anymore. Because while the American military has a lot of equipment and a lot of gear, they don't actually have a lot of well-trained soldiers. That they've essentially become just a gigantic bloated bureaucracy of management and administration. And that the primary tools that the American military uses in order to bully its way around the world is terrorism through the CIA and mercenary groups. But we're beginning to see that you can't actually maintain an empire that way. The capabilities of the CIA have diminished as people have begun to accept its reality. And you literally cannot hold territory with mercenaries. It's just not possible. And the Houthis have really punched a hole in that, right? Like the Houthis, like, imagine this. Like, it's just the most unbelievable story you'd ever hear. Like, if you were reading a history book and you were like, yeah, the United States military spends like $1 trillion a year on its military, more than the next top 10 countries combined on its military hardware and expenditure, getting defeated by this country right here. Just a broken down, poor, having a famine country like Yemen. Like, if you're Saudi Arabia, you're Iran, you're China, you're Russia, you're looking at this, what's gone on in Yemen, and you're going, yeah, these guys can't fight us. They can't win this war. Like, America can't go to war with China. America can commit itself to acts of terrorism in China, and America can fund mercenary groups in order to cause China problems. But China and America going to war with one another, America can't defeat China in a war. America can't defeat the Houthis in a war. America can't defeat Russia in a war by using Ukraine as a proxy. Like, it's got an actual army in Ukraine, and they're fighting to the last Ukrainian, and they're losing. So, like, to me, that's been a huge turning point in world perception. That the fear was always, oh, the Americans are going to come over here and they're going to do to us like what they did in Vietnam, right? They're going to do to us like they did in Cambodia, right? They're going to do another Iraq or something. But now I think the military might of a lot of places has gotten so that it's like, oh, yeah, they can't. Like, they can come here and cause damage and terrorize us, but they can't hold anything. Like, they can't actually win. And when you see the decline in military service in the United States, and you see the decline in military capability of the citizenry of the United States, turns out poisoning your citizens are a bad idea. You just realize, like, what advantage does America actually have on the world stage anymore? Like, how is it actually going to compete? What's it actually going to do? And the answer looks more and more and more, nothing. Looks like they're going to have an internal conflict and they're going to collapse inward. That's what it looks like to me. That America, the future of America is going to be, at the very bare bones minimum, a kind of bogging down. As it has like a debate with itself between, and fundamentally the debate is, do we continue pursuing this religious ideology, or do we begin the process of following uh, reason, right? Like, that has always been presented as if it's been a war between like Christianity and reason, but the real war is between the religious ideology of capitalism and reason. And if the religious ideologues actually relent or are defeated, which is the more likely case, then the United States will begin the process of rejoining the rest of the world. But as it stands now, I think that what you're going to see is just a steady downward decline. Future economic collapses. Like, the next economic collapse is going to be absolutely crazy, right? There's going to be just an absolute resetting of like what is considered valuable or important. People are going to find themselves in a position of complete debt peonage. There's going to be like this story where homelessness surged a record 18%. Yeah, it's going to be like 30, 40, 50%. It's going to be huge amounts. Huge amounts. And why? Because the capitalists are hoarding all the property and don't give a fuck if you're homeless. Pay us. And we're going to say, pay you with what? There's no jobs. Wages haven't gone up in 50 years. Pay you with what? And the capitalists are going to say, we don't give a fuck. The only reason we're doing anything is for more money, which leads to the fundamental flaw in sort of the trickle-down economics logic, which is if the point of investing is to make more money, then why would anyone invest if they already had all the money? Henry writes, the thing is, it's not really a matter of who is stronger, because if America and China fights at full force, the world's over. Even countries like Iran or Russia. Yeah, but America is aware of that as well. Like, you can see that kind of dawning understanding happening with the Ukraine crisis, right? That there was this sort of escalatory thing that's been happening, and it is sort of been held at like a tension point. But the United States knows that if the nukes start flying, like, they're dead too, right? That's the mutually assured destruction thing. Yeah. No, we're all strong enough to destroy the planet. Like, there's enough nuclear armament to completely destroy and annihilate all life on the planet, for sure. Which is why it's important for people to begin taking seriously disarmament. We should not have nuclear capability. Like, we should not have just nukes lying around. We just shouldn't have them. We should for sure be disarming. And previous American presidents were doing that. Reagan did that, right? Like, yeah, Nilo's kind of nailing it there. Yeah, essentially imperialism has met its final limit. Yeah. There is kind of a point where you can't actually move forward anymore. You can't actually succeed militarily any longer. And I think that it's sort of fascinating to watch. It's fascinating to see. It's going to be fascinating to watch. Like, the next 20 years, the next 40 years, like, the last half of my life watching what goes on in America, it's going to be crazy. It's going to be absolutely crazy to watch. Like, it's going to be look, we're going into a new year, so let me talk about the things I'm looking forward to seeing. Right? Oh, DM, good to see you. Here, DM writes, and then I'll tell you what I'm looking forward to. What are your thoughts on a basic income becoming a reality in 2025? No. Nope. No, capitalists will watch you starve in the street homeless before they give you a penny. Like, I don't know why we think there's a basic income coming down the pipe. It's going to be conservatives too. Like, we're going to have conservatives in almost every province, and we're going to have conservatives federally. No, I expect a bloodletting. Like, I expect things to get really bad. I don't expect to see anything even remotely useful coming out of any institution anywhere in the Western world. I think that we're heading for a significant decline, and that decline, I mean, it is stoppable, but it will require us to actually look at the capitalists and say, no more. Like, no more. So what am I looking forward to? So we get the absolute pleasure of watching both Russia and China uh, choose a new predecessor or choose a new leader, right? Xi Jinping is getting old. He's already been in power for 3 terms, which is unusual, very rare. It's very, very likely that he's not going to stay in power for too much longer. In Chinese society, it's very common, and in communist ideas generally, it's very common for the leader to step down and then kind of act as a mentor or as a power behind the throne kind of figure. Like you could take a look at Deng Xiaoping acted that way very clearly. Like it's pretty rare to see a figure like Mao. Like Mao is pretty unusual, but he makes sense. Like he makes sense for his own time and his own period and for what he was. And so we get to see China transition from Xi Jinping to someone else. And even though that someone else will likely be heavily influenced by Xi Jinping, it'll be interesting to see who that figure is and what they have to say and what they do. Because one of the things that's really emblematic of Chinese politics is that when their leader says something, they do the thing they say they're going to do. That's fascinating. We're so used to seeing a leader that's either chaotic and ridiculous or is just a liar, right? So I'll be fascinated to see if that's what continues in China. Russia is actually going to be the most interesting one, right? Henry writes, "Do you really think they're having fair elections up there?" Yes. I don't. There isn't a scrap of evidence to say anything otherwise. Uh, uh, like their elections are as fair as our elections are, and I don't see any evidence to suggest otherwise. The transition from Putin to a new leader is going to be very interesting. Like, I think the transition from Xi Jinping to another leader is going to be very similar to like Deng Xiaoping's transition to was it Zeman? XD, if you're in the chat, you can clarify for me, bud. You know more about this than I do. Henry writes, "I hardly think Putin is leaving." He will. Henry, here's a hard fact of reality. People die. It's just how it goes, baby. That's just how it goes. People die. Right? And so even if Putin clings on to power for as long as he possibly can, just iron fist, I'm going to take this to my grave. Well, he can't. He dies. And we're going to watch that happen. Yeah, he can last 20 more years, maybe. Maybe. But it's doubtful, right? It's doubtful. Most leaders along those lines want to do what I just described, which is they want to step down and have somebody else come in, and then they act as kind of a behind the scenes or behind the throne, as like a mentor or something, right? Like that's usually how this goes. It's very, very rare to get like a Mao type figure who like dies in office, right? That's atypical. It's not usual. And so, but in either case, even if it is 20 more years, right? Like, so I'll be 60. So I get to watch it happen. Something I get to look forward to. And the reason why I'm interested in that is that Putin has been, in terms of Russian politics, Putin has been something of a moderating force. Like he's not really, like when he came into power, he was really going to try to amalgamate or to merge with the West. That was really his goal. And Henry writes, I think one big difference of America is they care who they're trading with. I mean, I think America's lost on that front. America doesn't have the manufacturing capacity, and it's really, really shot itself in the foot. Like, it's alienated itself very bad from the rest of the world with its support of both the Ukraine war and Israel. Like, even amongst European nations, America is losing support. Yeah, Henry's correct on this. For America to trade with a country, they have to call it a democracy. Yeah, because America is ideologically driven, right? It's a religious ideology. Like Saudis, Brazil, South Africa, India. I mean, calling Saudi Arabia a democracy is a big stretch. Like, it's the Saudi princes. Like, the princes are in control there. Brazil, though, you're right. South Africa, India. But you're really meant, like, Brazil, South Africa, and India are literally in a trade alliance, or a trade group, rather, with China. That's BRICS, right? Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are in a trade organization called BRICS together, where they trade with one another outside of the what's called the international community, right? That doesn't, it sidesteps sanctions. That's its big scary problem, right? And China, of course, has said that its foreign policy is that it does not comment on the internal politics of the country that it needs to organize with. Right? That's its whole thing. It has said pretty explicitly, like, they believe that every country, it needs to come to socialism and communism on its own terms, and that it is not in the position of China to make an assessment of how that country should be governed internally. And so they are willing to trade with organizations. And of course, there's limits to this, right? They don't trade with Israel anymore. June, good to see you. Jimmy Carter was a bad guy, actually. What? What, June? We were just reading an article called Jimmy Carter's Blood-Drenched Legacy. Henry writes, but isn't this kind of bad for a country with much power to just watch other countries' internal get cooed, Taliban, etc.? So, the best way for me to describe China's policy, and I know it sounds kind of goofy, but it's accurate, actually comes from conversations and articulations in the television show Star Trek: The Next Generation, where they're talking about the Prime Directive. And the Prime Directive is the idea that we cannot meddle with the internal politics and the internal development of another culture or civilization. That in Star Trek world, that ethos and that theory is so important that it is their prime directive. It is the first directive for them. And the reasoning behind it, and there are big, long conversations. I recommend going on YouTube and looking it up because they're very fascinating. They're very well thought and very well argued. And the basic gist of it is you may think that you going in and interfering in internal politics is going to help, but it will not. That no matter how big, no matter how strong, no matter how powerful you are, your involvement will always lead to more harm than good, always. And you can really see that sort of bearing out with the way the Americans operate in the world, right? The many of these Americans go into these countries saying it's for the betterment of those people. It's going to help those people. It never does. It's always a disaster. It always causes more harm. That those people would have been better off if you had have left them the fuck alone. that you can go up to them and be like, hey, can we trade? Hey, you've got this. We'd like this. Do you want this? And you can have trade. But when it comes to the internal politics of that country, you stay out of it. Yeah, exactly, Henry. America is trying to interfere in other countries' affairs to install democratic governments, but often leads to long-lasting wars with local groups with high casualties. Yeah, so don't do it. China would instead just trade with whoever group is in power. Yeah, exactly. Non-interference. The prime directive. Right? That maybe you can sit there and be like, yeah, I'm not a big fan that Iran is essentially a theocracy. Right? I would not like to live in a theocracy. I hope and pray that one day Iran will not be a theocracy and that the people of Iran will be able to come out of their moment of theocratic rule and then do whatever this, that, or the other thing. But here's the thing, and I think that this is important to understand. You might look at Iran and think, a theocracy, what a horrible, etc., and so on and so forth. Well, the people of Iran might be happy with it. They might just be sitting there being like, yeah, theocracy, great. Islam, we love it. Right? You don't know. Right? You weren't born in their culture. You don't know anything about them, really. Right? So the best thing to do is to just look at them and to just be like, okay, cool. That's what you are. That's what you bring to the table. This is what you are as a culture. Do you want bananas? That's it. Like, that's really it. And it's this kind of secular idea, right? It's this secular idea that China holds. That it's non-judgmental and it's non-interference based in its diplomacy. Keeps it out of quagmires. Keeps it out of all kinds of stuff. Jeff says, isn't Israel a theocracy, the Jewish state? Yeah, I would say so. Like, it calls itself a democracy, but, like, it's Zionist. Like, yeah, and June's onto something, too, here. Israel's not a theocracy, but an ethno-state. I think there's a debate to be had there. But, in either case, could we call it a theocratic ethno-state? Zionism has always been a secular movement. Oh, hey, I think June is just like checkmate. Checkmate. I think June's right, actually. Because there are Christian Zionists. Like, Zionism doesn't care about your religion, right? It's just the idea that Israel should own that place, right? And that people who claim to be Jews, although a huge amount of Netanyahu's cabinet are not Jewish. Nilo writes, it reminds me of the tolerance of intolerance paradox. I don't really buy into that idea. That Karl Popper posited that there is a paradox where if you encounter intolerant people, you can't tolerate intolerance. And of course, the castigation is then, oh, well, who's intolerant now? Right? So he said, okay, I guess there is a paradox there, that tolerant people cannot tolerate intolerance. Right? But I take a slightly different tact on this, which is to say, no, I think that tolerant people are being more tolerant of intolerance when they meet intolerant people because they are applying the ideals and the concepts of intolerance to those who espouse them. Right? That society works by creating universal rules that sort of apply to everyone. And if you have a group of people who are saying, no, we don't want rules, we want rules to be applied differently to different groups of people, then a tolerant society would say, very well, we'll begin with you. And so I don't think it's a paradox. I think it's an adoption of tolerance to its final logical conclusion, which is that if you are to tolerate intolerance, then you will apply intolerance to the intolerant. Because it's their idea and it's their thought. It's not your thought, it's theirs. And if they can't handle it for themselves, then then they should stop talking that way. Like, if it's good enough for the Jews, then it should be good enough for you Aryans, right? Nilo writes, I think there's some value to the theory, but Popper was an anti-communist, so I think he's contradictory. I think that he was just struggling with the idea, right? I think he was just struggling with the idea that, like, well, we are a tolerant people and we do want to tolerate people, but there are some things that we can't tolerate. And so where is the line on that? Like, how do we draw that line, and where is that? And I just think that, like, gonna pat myself on the back a little bit. I think I nailed it. Like, just take what a person says and apply it to that person, right? And then there's no contradiction at all, right? We should round up X. Okay, cool. Let's start with you, right? Like, we should give food and clothing to X. Okay, cool. We'll start with you, right? Like, it's to me, it's a very simple principle that what you want for others, you should also apply to yourself. Right? That if you're going to say that group should get X, well, then you should also have that applied to you. Right? Murderers should have X applied to them. And then if you go and murder someone, then that's what should be applied to you. Right? So I think it's a very straightforward way of thinking about society generally and how to organize that sort of philosophical precept. Nilo writes, absolute tolerance or relative tolerance. Good evolution of the question. Yeah, I mean, it just always rang wrong in my ear to hear that there's a contradiction there. I don't think there is. Like, or a paradox. I just don't see it as a paradox. It's not a paradox. It's the fulfillment of tolerance, right? Just because it ends in violence doesn't make it intolerant, right? If they don't want it to end in violence, then they should stop asking for violence, right? Like, it's why, like, self-defense is a legal defense. If someone comes at you with the intent to do you harm, and you fight them and you win, well, they came at you with the intention to do harm, right? If they didn't want to have harm, then they should have not come at you with the intention to do harm. So I think that works on the societal level as well. If somebody's talking about doing harm to other people, then we say, okay, cool. Let's apply that to you. Like, so I don't really have a problem with Brian Thompson getting shot in the street. I'm like, yeah. It's his idea was to murder people for money. So we just had the decency to do it for justice. Right? What else am I looking forward to? On a personal level, I get to do some beekeeping next year. That's going to be really nice. That's going to be really nice. Henry writes, but for example, do you think it's okay for China as a major power to not pick a side between Israel and Palestine? So let's be specific about what Israel actually is and what that would represent for China, right? Israel is an extension of America in that region. And for China, and China has actually released statements saying that what it's seeing is a genocide. Like, it has chosen a side in its rhetoric, right? Uh, but it's not going to engage in a direct conflict with America, which is what that is, right? Like you can go see China's statements regarding the genocide that's happening in Israel. It's been pretty clear, right? And and what you're seeing China do is withdraw, right? Like it's not going to involve itself in that conflict, which I think is wise because the stakes of being involved in that conflict could lead to a direct confrontation with a psychotic superpower, which is America. Like America is a ruthless world power. Like it's absolutely vicious and violent. Getting involved in what is, from China's perspective, a minor conflict, to do what exactly? To achieve what end for what goal? From China's perspective, like the state, like it's deeply unfortunate and tragic, and China's solution, quote unquote, is to not involve itself with Israel, right? Like withdrawing its financial and economic support from Israel. And I think that that's the best that they can do. And while simultaneously condemning the genocide, I think it's the best that they can do. Like I think that it would be asking a lot of China to say, well, why don't you send military aid or military support or some kind of like, oh, Jesus. Okay. So it's like a full scale conflict now. Henry asks a big question here, actually. It's a very big question. Why exactly does America support Israel? Because it's a quote unquote democracy there, or because they're afraid of Holocaust history, because sensitive, or the chosen land for the state of Israel after World War? Joe Biden said it best, bud. He said it best like 30 years ago, right? Israel is a military base in the Middle East, right? Israel is America's foothold in the region. It is a way for NATO and America through the Mediterranean Sea to get resources into Israel very easily so that they can have big influence in the Middle East. That is the reason. I think the famous quote that Joe Biden said was, if Israel didn't exist, we'd have to invent it. And then Henry says, but it's military aid to watch out for the terrorists and bad rule to install democracies. So the only thing America cares about is resources. I think you're kind of caught up in this idea of, and I respect why there's lots of people that talk this way. I have a slightly different perspective, which is that America does not give a fuck at all about who rules or governs whatever, just as long as they're loyal to America. Like, America has installed plenty of dictatorships. There's actually a school in America for training dictators. It's called the School of the Americas. You can look it up. A huge amount of dictatorships throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s in Latin America were literally trained at the School of Americas. And so for me, like, the only reason why America is involved over here in any serious way is to steal as many resources as possible. That's the reason America is there. That they are quote unquote opening markets, right? Essentially going to a place, enslaving the local population, extracting as many resources as they can, and then as soon as there's no resources left to extract, abandonment. Sometimes they'll do military actions in a region with a smaller regional power in order to gain influence, gain larger influence, which is what the Vietnam War was, right? That the Vietnam War was done to staunch the spread of communism, make sure that Maoist China didn't seize more of the region and more territory. But then it's also done to quell China and to create a trade, a larger trade deal with China, right? And to put a wedge between Russia and China. Like I think that was probably the greatest act of diplomacy maybe in American history, was fomenting this split between Russia and China, which you can't fully claim that that's all America or Europe, right? But the Sino-Soviet split was just a huge, 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 huge moment in world history. Like, can you imagine Joseph Stalin dies, and imagine if Khrushchev stood up and said, we are going to keep supporting the Chinese in our quest for communism, fuck the West. And Russia and China had to stay together as a bloc. But that's not what happened. Khrushchev moved into a pattern of appeasement with Europe and America. And that forced China to do the same. And so that put a wedge between the two of them, and they basically started competing about who could make the better deal. And China made the better deal. Henry writes, for America to do that, they need long-term. Yeah. Capitalists do not think long-term. Right? That's the first thing you really got to understand about how capitalists think. They do not care about next year. They don't even really care about like the next quarter, right? They care about what's happening today, right now, and very little, very, very little else. Like, the only time you'll see any kind of long-term planning from the capitalist position is when they do incremental movements to remove support systems from people, right? That what they'll do, this is what happened in Nazi Germany, this is what's happening in America today, is they'll remove as much support as they can before there's a popular uprising, right? And then they'll stop and wait for that to quell, wait for that to go down, and then they'll do it again, right? And it usually manifests itself in the political system as a swing between liberals and conservatives, or Democrats and Republicans. Like, but the point is to remove as many supports as possible and to privatize as much as possible, and cause as much pain as possible, and then put in people in positions of power who will maintain that position. Liberals. And so your critique of this idea is accurate, right? For America to do that, they need long-term because they can get oil to last 1 year, but they need more and more to fuel the system over time. Yeah, but they don't care about that. They don't actually plan for that. Henry goes, do you think the liberals and conservatives are on purpose a puppet show to balance capitalism? Yes. I think that capitalists understand, like liberals and conservatives, Republicans and Democrats are allies. That there are broad disagreements so that the public can have large conversations. Richard, good to see you. Richard says, thanks for making the effort. Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. That's very kind of you. Conservatives and liberals are allies. They work together to create large discussions and disagreements and political wedges in the populace between the populace. So the populace can feel like they're engaging in politics, but they'll never, but both of them serve the interests of capital. Right? Henry writes, you can elect a communist, though. So, this is technically, in like the most technical way of thinking about things, technically the truth. That yes, you can technically elect a communist, technically. That's possible, technically. And in Canadian history, there have been seats that have gone to communists. That has happened. It's technical. There have been seats that have been elected communists. That happened in like the 70s, right? So there are many ways capitalists work in order to ensure that that outcome is unlikely. Uh, um, First and foremost is just the very obvious that these people get shot, right? Like the Red Scare was a real thing that happened. Like, read up on the history of the Red Scare. If you were a communist, you were under threat of extreme violence. Take a look at what happened to the Black Panther Party, right? Take a look at what happens to communist movements. Take a look at what happened to Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. Like, take a look at what happens to these people, right? Like, and it's not, take a look at what happens to, like, popes and bishops, right? Like, if you stand up and start espousing a pro-worker narrative, you will probably get shot at, right? Like, you'll get arrested. There's a very famous case in Canada. The leader of the Communist Party of Canada, his name was Tim Buck, and he was arrested, right? He was arrested and put in prison. Why? For being a communist, right? So first of all, there aren't a lot of people who are communists who are able to be communists because they get shot at and they get arrested and they get incarcerated and they have cops kicking in their doors, right? Like, that's a real thing that happens. So first of all, seeing communist leaders is difficult in the first place, right? B is the thing that you're observing, right? Oh, communists don't really have a lot of popular support, right? Because there's no class consciousness, right? That the major concern in America is wokeism, right? Everyone's too woke, right? Fuck Trudeau, right? I know what we'll do. We'll vote out the liberals and put in the conservatives again. And then we'll vote out the conservatives and put in the liberals. And then vote out the liberals and put in the conservatives and put in the conservatives and vote out the liberals. And nobody is like, because propaganda works, right? There's a reason why they spend billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars on propaganda. Because it works. If it didn't work, they wouldn't do it. But it does work. And so they do it. And not just like news and media and like television, right? Like your school system. The education system is highly propagandistic, right? That it's baked into your school curriculum to demonize communism. And it isn't until kids get out of school that they can even begin looking. And like, very famously, there's one of the like leading communist figures right now in America. His name is Richard Wolff. I highly advise everybody look up Richard Wolff. That's Wolff with 2 F's. Richard Wolff is a very, very well-spoken, articulate, prominent communist. He's a professor of economics. I believe he's at the University of Michigan right now, ? In any case, he tells this really great story of how he was trained at Harvard, Stanford, and Yale. Like, he's got like 3 PhDs, this guy. And he says, never once was I ever directed to read anything written by Karl Marx. Like, that's pernicious. That's pernicious. Like, that's critical. B over on Twitch, good to see you. Hello to you. Hello, comrades. Good to see you, bud. So that's B, right? Is that you have a heavy system of propaganda. And then C is that you send intelligence assets into established parties and you dismantle them internally. That's what happened to the Communist Party of Canada. Is that you send in assets in order to create wedges, in order to create factions, and then break them apart from the inside out. And if you talk to members from the Communist Party of Canada, they'll tell you how that happened. So there is a concerted billions, like $100 billion effort in order to destroy communist movements. And you can see them. They're not secret. right? Like the Red Scare was real. It happened. You literally had a senator, Joe McCarthy, rounding people up. Have you ever been a card-carrying member of the Communist Party? Like literally naming names. And like, if you were part of the Communist Party, you lost your job. Like they literally purged entire industries. Very famously, Hollywood was just purged of communists. Like, that's a real thing that happens. And when you purge your society of a type of ideology or a type of person and then demonize it publicly for decades, it's very difficult to make traction, right? It's very difficult to make traction. The only reason there's been an opening now, and the only reason why people are like me are even being listened to by people like you, is because the system of capital is failing so dramatically. And that your class consciousness has raised just enough to hear people like me out. Right? But it used to be that I would just be a dirty commie and people would walk away. And that still happens. There's still people that are caught in that old paradigm. Right? Ah, you're just a dirty commie. Maybe today they'll say tanky. You got a lot of that. Right? And so those are the three, what I would call the three pillars of why communists don't get elected. Right? Pillar one, they die. Right? State-sanctioned violence. Pillar two, state-funded propaganda, which is very effective. And then three, intelligence services do internal work. Right? They infect parties and they destroy them from within. B writes, even to the point that we in America now have what we call mega commies. That's actually a fact. And they're the worst kind of fascists living amongst us. I mean, I wouldn't describe the mega commies as the worst kind of fascists. I think that the worst kind of fascists are fascists. I do have major concerns. I think that we are looking at a national socialist movement. Right? Like their president outright the big red flag to me is that their president refers to a Nazi in his writings. Like, I don't know how big and bright a red flag you need. Right? We should do what the Nazi Carl Schmitt told us to do and become partisans. Patagonia. Communist regimes historically have curtailed freedom of speech, religion, and political dissent. I mean, yeah, they often kill Nazis. Right? They often don't allow Nazis to speak. That's true. Yeah. They often don't allow the spread of Nazism into their country. That's true. Right? Yeah, they don't like the political dissent of Nazis. That's definitely true. And if you assassinate their leaders, they're going to do something about it. Right? Like, what's this pro-Nazi rhetoric you're spreading into my channel? Henry writes, what is a MAGA communist? So, make America great again, right? MAGA. The whole idea behind what's called MAGA communism is that the MAGA communist will say, we have to end the culture war, right? We have to stop condemning people for their bigoted views, racism, misogyny, that sort of stuff, and start reaching out to them on exclusively economic lines. And that's a pretty appealing position for a straight white man, right? And of course, the critique of that position, even if they're well meant, but the critique of that position would be that's a position of white privilege. You, as a white straight male, have the privilege to put aside culture war issues and reach over the aisle to the people that are perpetuating those issues on a populace that cannot simply say, oh, the culture war, let's just end that. Right? Yeah, mega communists say they are communists, but they support Trump. Yeah. No. They're a very kind of incoherent group of people. And I, I'd like to say maybe it's just because they're young, right? They haven't really thought through their positions, right? They don't really understand the concept of white privilege. They don't really understand like these things. Like maybe they're just a bunch of well-meaning young men. But my gut tells me that should they ever seize power, we would basically just see the white population receive a lot of support while the minority population fell into decline. Henry writes, the problem is who the Nazi is. For example, as a person who speaks pro-capitalism, are they a Nazi? No, Henry, when it comes to the Soviet Union, we're like, and Stalin especially, right? Like, we're talking about Nazis, dude. Like Nazis. Like, critiquing the Soviet Union and Stalin, like, the Nazis killed 25 million Russians. Critiquing the Soviets for like cracking down on political dissent is just cartoonish. It's just an unintelligent way of looking at the world. Like you don't get to mass murder a people and then expect them to be like, well, hunky dory. It's just silly. Patagonia says F communism leads to equality and prosperity. But it does. You can read the works of Michael Parenti. Michael Parenti writes a book called Black Shirts and Reds. And he has given many lectures. Like, communism works, baby. Like, very straightforwardly. Just stop listening to the CIA, for goodness sakes. Why have nearly all communist regimes resulted in economic collapse? They haven't. They just haven't. Political oppression? Yep, they go after Nazis, all right. That's for sure the truth. And widespread human suffering, I don't really know what you're talking about. Like, is it widespread human suffering like the destruction of Libya? Or the invasion of Iraq? Like what moment are you talking about with the widespread human suffering? Exactly. Because, like, the Soviet Union went from being, like, in a single generation, went from being, like, a feudal monarchy to the first people into space. So I don't actually know what you're talking about. Countries with mixed economies and free markets have consistently outperformed them in terms of wealth, innovation, and quality of life. I mean, you know what would be a real diminishment of a quality of life? Invading a country and murdering 25 million people. Oh, Patagonia wants to talk about Nazi propaganda. Okay. So what you call the Holodomor is literally Nazi propaganda. Just straightforward Nazi propaganda. So you might want to stop spreading around Nazi propaganda. Like, just very nakedly, I could just say that. So there was a famine in there was a famine. No, I'm not saying you're a Nazi. I'm saying you're spreading around Nazi propaganda. And you might want to stop that. Right? Because spreading around Nazi propaganda and keeping Nazism alive is a bad idea. Right? It's not going to lead to good conclusions. Right? Like, for a guy that's so, like, crazy against communism, you sure love to not pay any attention to Nazism. So it's sort of big red flag for us communists. Right? Like, what happened during that period of time? Like, this whole region, right, Ukraine and, like, this whole thing is a famine-stricken area. There were many famines under the Tsars, right? And when those famines happened under the Tsars, they basically just said, get fucked. So when the Russian Revolution happens and, like, the counter-revolution and all this kind of stuff, there's another famine in the region, in a famine-stricken area. But we have the archives. We've got the Soviets scrambling to resolve the famine. The idea that it was an intentional genocide is Nazi propaganda. Stop spreading Nazi propaganda around. And then when the Soviets resolved the famine, there's never been a famine in the region again. So they experienced a famine in a famine-stricken region, And instead of ignoring the problem like the SARS did, they solved it. And there's never been a famine there again. So do me a favor. Stop spreading around Nazi propaganda. Yeah, JT. It's like thinking the Victims of Communism Memorial is not about Nazis. Behind all the anti-communism leads to Nazi rhetoric. Yep, every single time. Right? It's just very, like, big red flag that people come in hot on communism and just, like, completely ignore the existence of Nazis. Just a big red flag. If you present evidence and you get... What evidence? What evidence? Saying Nazi propaganda is not evidence. Here's what I want to see, Patagonia. Okay? This is the evidence I'd like to see. Okay? I'll give you exactly the reason. And you can go find it. Right? Go find it, bring it back. This is your homework. Okay? There's no such thing as a secret genocide. Okay? You know why? There's no such thing as a secret genocide? Because they're huge affairs. They're enormous. They require millions of people. You need to organize a whole society to do it. When Adolf Hitler organized the Holocaust, he did so publicly. Right? He wrote a book called Mein Kampf. It's very obvious. Right? Oh my God. So you're just going to look on Google now. You're asking ChatGPT. Okay. Gulag system. Even the CIA says that the Gulag system was about the same as the rest of the prison system. You can literally go on the CIA website. Patagonia, World War II atrocities and forced relocations. Like, you're literally bringing up the Nazi invasion. Kind of embarrassing, dude. Like, for a guy who doesn't want to be called a Nazi, you talk a lot like a Nazi. Like, really weird. Like, kind of creepy, actually. Like, you understand that the Nazis existed, right? Like, you get that there's, like, a Nazi... Like, you get the Nazis exist, right? Like, for somebody who's so, like, overwhelming... Yeah, like, Patagonia, like, for somebody who's so overwhelmingly concerned about communists, you seem to just be very forgiving about Nazis. Why? Like, why won't you acknowledge that Nazis exist? This is what I find really, really weird about these anti-communist types. Is it's just like, Nazis don't exist. We don't need to talk about Nazis. We don't need to talk about, like, the very difficult decisions that communists are put to when they've got Nazi war machines at their borders. Right? Like, everything's just in a vacuum with people like you. Right? Like, communists were making decisions in a complete and total utter vacuum. There's nothing going around. There's no difficult decisions being made. There's no speeches. There's no conversations with the populace. There's no, like, wide scale communications. There's no understanding that there's this huge, enormous threat coming that literally killed 25 million people. And then you continue, Nazis were the worst in the 20th century. And yet you don't bring them up or talk about them or even consider them in your conversations. If they're the worst thing, then why are you blaming the communists for reacting to them? Like, you're literally saying World War II atrocities? Like, it's war, baby. Who's pushing the war? Who are the aggressors? Like... Like, I don't know why you've just omitted the Nazis from your thinking. It's concerning, frankly. Like, it's very concerning. So, like, when the Nazis show up in your neighborhood and start beating the shit out of communists, are you going to be like, yeah, get them? Okay, Henry says there are proofs of the Holodomor. Okay, cool. Where? Let me finish what I said, right? Find me a single Soviet bureaucrat anywhere talking about committing a genocide in Ukraine. The second largest cohort that fought on the side of the Soviets against the Nazis were Ukrainians. Like, what are you talking about a genocide? Like, genocides are intentional. You can't keep them secret. So go find any Ukrainian, any Soviet, discussing this as if it's an intentional atrocity being carried out on behalf of the Soviets. And moreover, it doesn't make any sense. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Why would they do it? To what end? For what goal? To achieve what? What did they gain? So go ahead and find the evidence. I mean, you can find evidence of a famine, because there's certainly a famine. But there's no evidence that it was intentional. Patagonia says, because you're pro-communist, I'm not. I'm saying Nazism is worse, but communism is a little less worse, but still bad. But your examples are literally Nazi propaganda. CIA propaganda, the gulags, although the CIA itself disproves it. You can literally go on the CIA website. And then World War II, which is literally like fighting against Nazis. So for a guy who's like trying to convince me that communism is bad, you sure give the Nazis a lot of rope. Like, it's just wild. Like, it really is. It's really, really wild. That, like, your perception is so rooted in pro-Westernism that you're just walking right by the Nazis and are just like, yeah, the Holodomor, literal Nazi propaganda, World War II, literally Nazi war. Like, bro, how do I take you seriously? How do I take you seriously at all? No, I'm pro-evidence. I like evidence. I root my thinking in a material dialectic, right? A material historical dialectic and evidence. I don't listen to Nazis like you do. And I don't take Nazis seriously. And I certainly don't let Nazis off the hook when they start world wars. Like, really creepy conversation, bro. Like, really creepy. This right here is a top 5 creepy conversation. Is the U.S. a fascist country yet? I mean, one of the quotes that has been attributed to Mussolini is that fascism is the merger of business and state. Who's the president? Who keeps talking about being the president? Like, take a look at the UK. It's literally a Goldman Sachs executive as their prime minister. Patagonia writes, with a China flag, you would support a full-scale invasion of Taiwan. Taiwan is their country. You can't invade your own country. Like, if Florida were to declare its independence, I would expect the United States to do something about it. And if Taiwan declared its independence, I would expect China to do something about it. Like, Taiwan is not an independent country. It's a part of China. Even the United States has acknowledged that since Nixon. So, yeah, I would say that if there was like a US-backed independence movement in Taiwan, that China would invade it. Yeah. Just like if there was a Chinese-backed independence movement in Florida, America would invade it. Yeah. But it provides 60% of microchips in the world. Yeah, Taiwan was pretty smart to get involved in the global economy that way. China's been trying to work towards getting off of that, creating their own microchips. The problem is educating the populace. That's the real problem. It takes a minute. But China's going to do it. But, like, rest assured, like, there's absolutely... Henry, find them. Who? Name them. There's absolutely no way China is going to allow this to become an quote unquote independent country. Like, it's just not a real thing. And if you think they should, I think you're nuts. Like, this is an unsinkable aircraft carrier off the coast of China. They are not going to allow the Americans to put military assets here. And if you think they should, I think you're nuts. Why is it theirs? So, Taiwan has been the traditional ruling seat of China for 4,000 years. This is where the Taipei is literally where the Royal Palace is. The National Palace Museum is the Royal Palace. For literally like China's 4,000 year history, this is where the ruling class lived. This is where they governed China from. In 1949, Mao and the Chinese communists formed up the People's Republic of China, right? And they were trying to get into Taiwan. I'm going to give you just the history of this, right? Who stopped them? Truman. Truman didn't allow them to get into Taiwan. And so it was a contested territory as the Americans invaded Korea, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, right, to quote-unquote staunch the spread of communism. And then in the negotiations between Mao and Nixon, I'm jumping forward a little bit here, Nixon outright said, as part of those negotiations, yeah, Taiwan will be part of China. And the policy that they govern under is 2 systems, 1 country. That's the policy. And that's how China and Taiwan's relations have been since then. And with the understanding, like China's understanding, and Taiwan's understanding too, has just been that, yeah, over time, Taiwan and China will just become culturally linked. And it'll just be kind of understood that China and Taiwan, and so there's never been an invasion, right? Mao never got into Taiwan, Deng didn't, Xi Jinping didn't, right? So it's just been like kind of culturally understood. Taiwan doesn't have a seat at the UN, right? It's not acknowledged as an independent country because even the United States, as part of the agreement between China and the United States, China acknowledged that Taiwan is part of China. And that's the history. It's an extremely culturally important province. It's also extremely important militarily. So there is a 0% chance that China considers Taiwan anything other than part of China. And moreover, the Taiwanese consider Taiwan part of China. Right? Anytime you poll the Taiwanese and you ask them about independence, about 10% of them are like, yeah, independence. And then 10% are like, no, we should become fully integrated into China. And then the rest of the society, like 80%, are just like, this is good. Just what we're doing now, great. But of course, what the Americans are trying to do is exactly what they did in Ukraine, which is they're trying to funnel resources and money in here to fund an independence movement so that they can create turmoil in the region and justify conflict with China. Just like they did with Ukraine. It's the exact same reasoning. It's the exact same rationale. Right? It's their containment strategy. And if the Americans can turn Taiwan into like literally an American military base with straight up fighter jets and bombers, they'd love that. They'd be way on board with that. China's not going to let that happen. They'd be absolutely insane to allow that to happen. And it'd be insane to suggest that they allow that to happen. Like, Taiwan is part of China. It's been that way for 50, 60 years. Moreover, Taiwan has been part of China for 4,000 years of its history. The idea that Taiwan is independence is Looney Tunes crazy go nut batshit insane. Which is why the Americans suggest it. Why people like you come into my chat. Patagonia, dude, don't open up a Wikipedia article, man, or ask ChatGPT. Like, come on. You're just embarrassing yourself here. Come on, dude. Like, I see this shit all the time. People are just like, oh, ChatGPT, what's the history of Taiwan and China? And all you're doing is confirming everything I'm saying. You can look this up, Timothy Snyder's Bloodlands, so literally a Google search, right? Europe between Hitler and Stalin. Yeah, just because a guy says so doesn't mean that's evidence. Right? Which is what he does. Like, that's all he does. He just says that it happened. This is evidence. Okay? This is evidence. I'm gonna say it again as clearly as I can. Okay? Genocides do not happen in secret. When Netanyahu commits the genocide against the Gazan people, he says so. When Canada commits the genocide against the First Nations people, we said so. When America commits the genocide against the First Nations people, as well as the African enslavement, they said so. When Adolf Hitler committed the Holocaust, guess what? He said so. If you want to convince me that the Holodomor was a genocide, show me a single bureaucrat, a single person in Russian or Ukrainian society talking about it that way. That's evidence. That is the evidence that I will accept. But you know what you find? Because I've looked into it. You know what you find? You find the Soviets, Stalin included, saying, oh, damn, we got to send grain. We got to resolve this famine. We underestimated the crisis. We got to do something about that. You find exactly the opposite. So until you come at me with anybody in the Soviet Union or in Ukraine, like where's the counter movement? Where's the resistance movement? They're committing a genocide, right? Where's the resistance? Like, the story doesn't add up. It doesn't actually make sense. So if you want to convince me, I'm literally telling you what evidence to show me. Show me any Russian figure anywhere in the Soviet Union, any Soviet, any Ukrainian, anywhere. Viktor Yushchenko in 2005. Yeah, they're politicizing it. Like, just recognizing it, that's not evidence. I've given you what my standard of evidence is. And guess what? That's easy. Like, I really can't overstate this. I really, really can't overstate this. While you guys throw out Nazi propaganda and then show people who agree with Nazi propaganda. My standard for evidence is extremely reasonable. I'll say it again, because it seems like it's not sinking in. Okay? When Adolf Hitler committed the Holocaust, he said so. He wrote about it before he did it, and the Nazis talked about it as they were doing it and after they did it. It's easy to find. When the Canadians did the residential school system to kill the Indian, they voted on it in Parliament. They talked about it. Yeah, all he wants is evidence as a Soviet saying it. Yes, that's called evidence. Because you can't plan a genocide in secret. Viktor Yushchenko in 2005 to 2010, yeah, for political purposes. Like, he's confirming like, that happened here in Canada too. Canada is one of the few countries, because there aren't that many, that acknowledged the quote-unquote Holodomor. And why did they do that? To shore up the Nazi support. Like, here in Canada, like, our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, literally applauded a Nazi in our parliament and then erected a Nazi monument. Like, again, I'm just going to say it. You guys are really forgiving of Nazis. Like, it's really weird how much you're just like, yeah, Nazis, okay, but the communists. Like, it's very creepy. Like, it's very, very creepy. No. Raphael Lemkin. Oh, yeah, I've seen this before. Yeah, this isn't the win you think it is. Yeah. This is the guy that coined the term genocide. He brought forward the idea that it should be applied to the Soviets and lost. So much for your Google search. Right? When you dig into this guy, what you find is that he wanted the term genocide to be applied to the Soviets, and nobody agreed with him. And he lost. So thanks for confirming my point. Are we good? Are we moving on? Like, so far you guys are just showing me a bunch of losers. Just a bunch of American propagandists and a bunch of losers. And I've given you my standard of what evidence is. Like, I can show you Nazis talking about the Holocaust. I can show you it. It's easy to find. It's not hard. You should be able to meet that standard of proof. I can show you Netanyahu talking about the genocide in Gaza. It's not hard. I could show you members of his parliament talking about the genocide. It's not hard. It's easy to find. I could show you the votes in America. I can show you the votes in Canada. It's not hard. It's easy to find. Yeah, Patagonia, again, great. So one guy wanted it to be called a genocide and he lost. So what? Like, you want it to be called a genocide, but you're losing, so I don't care. Like, it's just weird. Like, what an odd conversation. Gamer Jam, only capitalism can produce labor shortages and work shortages simultaneously. Yeah. The solutions they are selling you won't fix either problem. They'll only make rich capitalists more rich and powerful. It's comical how 150 years ago Marx figured shit out for a society today. Somehow, yeah, still doesn't understand. Yeah, well, because it's not taught. Right? Like Richard Wolff nailed that. And the Nazis lost their grip on their power, and it was because the communists intervened. The communists actually killed more Nazis during that time. Yeah, kill as many Nazis as you want. They're Nazis. I don't give a fuck. You can't find Nazis talking about it? Sure, bud. Okay. like Mein Kampf. Straight up. Adolf Hitler himself. Yeah, of course they did Patagonia. Like, why would they want... Like, what do you expect them to do? That's why we hold the position, right, as an evidence-based channel, that, yeah, the famine happened. And you can read internal documents that the Soviets themselves published talking about what they feel they could have done better, right? That the charge of mismanagement is a much easier position to hold, right? The charge of genocide is just ridiculous, right? Like, it's just dumb fuckery, frankly. It's looking at a chaotic situation and calling it intentional. It's just not real. Like, certainly not the same as the Holocaust, for example. I think it's if you want to hold this anti-communist line, like, and maintain your intellectual credibility and not just keep regurgitating Nazi propaganda, the better position would be to say that they mismanaged the famine, right? And there's a great document that you can find where the Soviets themselves write an internal document saying what mistakes did we feel we made during that period of time. Like, how did we contribute to the famine? And they list, I think, 6 points where they talk pretty openly about, like, we moved some grain over here, the land reform movement that we were doing over here exacerbated it. We misunderstood. We underestimated the amount of seed that was being planted, and, like, back and forth they went, right? That's a much stronger position. And that's a position that I'm willing to bite the bullet on. Like, yeah, like, countries like the Soviets aren't gods. Like, communists aren't gods, right? Mistakes happen. They especially when you're dealing with, like, revolution and counter-revolution and trying to shore up security and, like, dealing with a rising Nazi threat and, like, just all kinds of crazy shit happening in your country. Like, yeah, it makes sense that like God would defeat you, right? That makes sense. It doesn't make them evil, right? It doesn't even make them incompetent. It just makes them less powerful than God. Okay. Or if you prefer, less powerful than the natural world. Like, okay, that I could accept that. Right? That's fine. If the choice is between a system that every so often kind of drops the ball when the natural world rears its head versus a system that actively perpetuates violence and death in the world, which is capitalism, I know which side I'm going to go. So Patagonia says, I'm trying to argue why communism is bad too. Is that okay? Sure, but you just keep stepping on Nazi landmines, which is concerning. And I'm not going to let it go, right? I'm not going to look at you and be like, here is a good faith actor arguing from a position of knowledge, right? If the first thing that comes out of your mouth is literal Nazi propaganda, I'm definitely not going to consider you a peer, right? Like, I don't think you know anything about the subject. I don't think you're particularly wise about the subject. I think it's very weird that you're regurgitating Nazi propaganda, and you don't seem to understand that it is Nazi propaganda. I also find it really, really weird and odd and strange and creepy that you keep trying to peg the Russians as being like evil and demonic while they're like scrambling to fight against a force that literally murdered 25 million of them. I find that to be really creepy. Like, that's just really weird. Like, did extreme things happen during World War II? Of course. Like, I'm not Pollyannish. And I'm not a dumbass. But who's setting the tone? And who's the aggressor? Right? Like, you're pretending as though the Soviets are developing peacefully and just fucking it up and doing genocides and causing all these kinds of problems. It's just bonkers. It's just bananas. Like, and now you're doubling down on Lemkin. Who gives a fuck about Lemkin? Right? He put it forward, he lost. I don't understand why you're siding with losers. Like, he lost. Who gives a fuck? Like, who cares what he said? Like, nobody adopted his position. People ignored him for a reason. Because it was wrong. Because it was inaccurate. Because it was false. Because other people looked at the evidence and went, doesn't look like. And just because one guy said so doesn't mean shit. Like, again, we have the Soviet archives. Like, I don't know why this is just not penetrating. And it never does. Right? And it never does. I don't know why it doesn't penetrate. Now we're just wandering into conspiracy theory territory, dude. Like, that's where we're at now. Oh, it would have happened except, Look, dude, this would be very easy to prove. It really would be. Especially today. It would be ridiculously easy to prove. And I've given you my evidence level. Right? So, either drop it or get banned. Because I'm sick of this. Like, you come in here with your Nazi propaganda and your Nazi apologetics. And then you have the gall to pretend like that's not what you're doing. Like, do you want to actually ask a real question? Or are you just going to keep with this Nazism? No, that's what's so, like every anti-communist is just a Nazi in waiting. Like, that's all it is. Why is communism good? Because it works. Slam dunk. Like, let's take the Soviet Union, right? Okay, let's take the Soviet Union. Before the Russian Revolution, the Soviet Union was a feudal agrarian economy ruled by a Tsar, Nicholas II. Most of the society was peasants. It was very, very, very few people you would consider wealthy, right? Like, literally, like, think King Arthur and you're basically there, right? Just peasants living in squalor. Okay? No, not just poor leadership. Not just poor leadership, right? A backwards economic system. A backwards economic system. And that's important to understand. Right? Oh yeah, World War I. Fucking brutal. Like, and Nicholas was sending people off to die for pointless causes and causing all kinds of problems. What's because of World War I? That they have a feudal agrarian economy? Okay, man, if you're going to ask questions, man, like, please listen. Because, like, I genuinely don't think you know anything about the subject. Like for real. You've made that pretty clear. Poor leadership and economy. Yeah, Nicholas, right? The economy, right? So there's the Russian Revolution. They overthrow the Tsars. So, in a period of a single generation, one generation, okay? They go from that, literally like 90% of the population being peasants, to being a industrialized superpower that can rival the other superpowers in the world and create an economy that's so overwhelming and powerful that it defeats the Nazis in a single generation. And then they go on to be the first people into space. Like, there is a person whose life's experience actually was working a farm with an ox pulling a trowel. And by the end of his life, that same field being worked by combines while he watched his country shoot rockets into space. My man. Yeah. It's the confidence in the bluster that gets me the most, eh? It's just the confidence in the bluster, right? Like, these guys come in and they think they know everything and they're just fucking clueless. Right? Like, they think that they can just whip open ChatGPT or whip open Google and they'll have all the answers. And they don't have respect for people who actually know stuff. Right? So why do I support communism? Because it works. And that's one very clear example of how it worked. Another very clear example is China. China has had wondrous success. Like, even if you want to toe the ridiculous line that what's happening in China today is because of capitalism, which is just kind of embarrassing. The period of time when Mao was in charge alone was a huge, huge improvement to the Chinese position and the Chinese state. Before Mao showed up, they were experiencing the 100 years of humiliation. Yeah, we're on China, the other communist country. Like, I know you're pro-Nazi, dude, but can you at least be serious? Jesus. It's just kind of embarrassing. So I think I'm going to move on from you, dude, because I don't think you're a serious person. Like, I'm happy to inform people of stuff if they're operating in good faith, but it's pretty clear to me that you're just sort of pro-Nazi. Yeah, bye. In fact, don't come back, okay? We don't need Nazism in here. Oops. No. We're a pretty staunch anti-Nazi place. Stop espousing Nazi values. It's just always weird to see these creepy little pro-Nazi guys come in here. Like, go play Heart of Iron 4, dude. Like, jerk off while you're doing it too, okay? Just embarrassing. It's just so stupid to see, eh? Like, so what just happened there? Guy comes in, just starts spewing Nazi propaganda right off the bat. Literally is doing like ChatGPT Google searches, pretending like he knows what he's talking about. Doubles down on a loser who was rejected by his peers. Finally actually gets challenged and asks one question, right? And in the moment I'm giving examples, he just laughs like a moron. Capitalists are stupid, eh? Like, they're just deeply stupid people. Man, it's always good to see it. That just, they're too stupid to actually have real conversation. Like, a religious ideology like that is just absolutely crazy. And that's all it is. Like, that's all it is. I'm just going to end this by reaffirming what everybody should know by now, if you're a regular watcher of this show. Capitalism is a religious ideology. It's on the same level as, like, Jesus Christ is coming back tomorrow or the earth is flat. Like, it's unintelligent. The people who espouse it are stupid. But they're trapped in it. Right? They're just trapped in it. And hopefully, you hope that, like, this kind of thing sticks in people's craw. Like, when a loser comes in here and just shits all over the place and gets rejected, one hopes it sticks in his craw a little bit. And maybe the next time he encounters a communist, he won't be so willing to just barf out Nazi propaganda the way that he does. Ugh. It's just gross. Well, I'm going to close this one down, guys. Yep, Gamer Jam, you're absolutely right. The only way things will change is if people rise up from the bottom, like with Roosevelt. That's right. All right, guys. Always remember, you are a quantum being walking around in quantum energy. These billionaires are doing everything they can. They're spending hundreds of billions of dollars, and we just watched the result of it to convince you that that's not happening. You'll just stay the good little cog in this goddamn machine that they need you to be. Rebel. Revolt. Repent. Good luck. Whew. We're going to need it.